Hello Yoshi players, this is Yoshi Player here and welcome to another episode of episode of the Loud House Reviewed. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at every episode of Season 2. It's been quite some time since I talked about Season 1, and surprisingly, a lot of you really liked that video. It even got a very high amount of views, so I figured, hey, I might make this a tradition and review every episode of the entire show. In fact, I was planning on reviewing every episode right when I was doing my Season 1 video. I think once this video is uploaded, a lot of people are going to want me to review Season 2. And a lot of you seem to want that. I saw a lot of comments about people waiting to see my review on certain episodes this season, some of which I understand, others not so much. And just like Season 1, not every review this season is going to be the same formulaic stuff. Some of my opinions may vary compared to a bunch of other people. And you're going to want to remember me saying that because there's quite a number of episodes you may expect me to go into, but are actually quite different than you would expect. Just like last time, I'm going to be reviewing every episode in this season, and each one will either get a ranking of Glory House, Average House, or Garbage House. These rankings will determine how I feel about each episode this season. So, for Season 2, we have 49 11-minute episodes and 3 half-hour episodes. Unlike Season 1, we finally get our first dose of half-hour episodes this season, and it'll be interesting to see what I think about these half-hour episodes. Are they better than any normal episode? Are they really disappointing? Should they not even do half-hour episodes in the first place? Let's find out throughout this review. And with that said, it's time to dive into the 49 episode chaos of The Loud House Season 2. Starting off with the very first half-hour episode. It's not often that a season actually kicks off with a half-hour episode. Anyway, this episode is 27, 11 Louds a Leapin. The Loud family is preparing to have the best Christmas yet. Everyone has praised this episode all throughout the year, and yeah, I think it's a good episode, but unfortunately, I wouldn't call it one of my absolute favorites. But before I get into that, I figure I should probably start off with the positives. With the length of this episode being 22 minutes, it surprisingly gives each character their moments to shine. Each character in this episode gets their own subplots, and I think they fill in the episode's runtime just enough. We don't have all of this time to actually explain the main story, because it could drag on a bit, and even if we get some information out of it, I don't think it would be enough to hold the 22 minutes. I also really liked the way that Mr. Grouse was portrayed in this episode. It's the first time he actually gets a major role, and I think they handled him really well. He's the grumpy man who takes all of their stuff, but he learns about the true meaning of Christmas, and he genuinely feels sorry for the way he's been behaving, and how he really wants to spend Christmas with his family. He may seem like a grumpy old man, but deep down, he loves those that are close to him, and he'll always be willing to do nice things for everyone. And of course, I love the song in the episode. All the characters getting together to sing the song to Mr. Grouse is just one of the greatest moments of Season 2, and I know I'm early on this, but I don't care, this song was amazing. And the episode looks nice too. I love the snow setting, I like all the decorations, I love the way the house looks. It's a very nice looking episode. The jokes are done pretty well too. I like the running gag of Lenny trying to make her own dress, but ends up taking something from her mother and she's always questioning what happens to it. I got some slight amusement from Luann's 12 puns of Christmas thing, and yeah, for the most part this episode gets the comedy down really well. So why don't I put this episode as one of my absolute favorites, you may be wondering? Well, if I'm gonna be completely honest with you, this episode is kinda predictable. Yes, I like the way the story is handled, and we do get some nice insight on Mr. Grouse's family, but aside from that, the whole thing just seemed predictable. We kind of knew what was going to happen. From the start, Mr. Grouse is his usual self, and we knew that this was going to lead up to the point where he's actually kind of a nice guy because he has a family, and how sad he is because he doesn't have the money to go to visit his family. Yeah, it's nice, and we do feel sorry for him, but we could see it coming from a mile away. Second, as much as I liked the fact that they added in small subplots to fill in the episode's runtime, I have to ask, What did it all lead up to? And no, you can't say, oh, they all learned about the true meaning of Christmas. That's not what I'm talking about. All the subplots have their own different stories, but they never tie into the end. The only subplot that even has some relevance throughout is Luna's subplot, where she's trying to think of a song to sing, and it turns out to be the song that everyone sings at the end of the episode. I'm not saying some of the subplots are stupid, although to be fair, Clyde's subplot was probably the worst thing about this episode. It's just that none of them led to anything. Most of the subplots are just there for the sake of runtime and for the sake of comedy. And yeah, I like that we have subplots at least to give all the characters moments to shine, but they don't really add to anything. And I get it, it's a half-hour episode, of course they had to do this, but at least add to something. So while I don't love this episode as much as everyone else does, I will be honest, I still like this episode, and even if I didn't think it was good, it would definitely be on the higher end of okay episodes. I'm gonna put this episode in the glory house. I think it's good, but I don't think it's amazing as everyone else thinks it is. But to be honest, it does remind me of the awesome time of year that is Christmas. Episode 28A, Intern for the Worst. Tensions run high when Lincoln and Clyde both get an internship at Flips and compete to win the manager title. So here we have our first episode focused on Lincoln and Clyde in Season 2, and as an episode goes with them two focused together, I actually really like this episode. I think what helps this episode really good in my opinion is that there's actually some very strong chemistry built between Lincoln and Clyde. They're both trying to compete for the manager title at Flips and end up putting their friendship in a serious situation. I usually like it when cartoons do these kind of episodes where the two best friends are competing against each other and realize their mistakes, and this episode does what I think it's going to. Lincoln and Clyde do compete against each other, they put their friendship at stake, but during the end they realize how selfish they were being and they make up for it. It may seem like stuff I've seen before, but I think it helps too, because this episode's filled with a bunch of other good stuff as well. Flip is obviously the antagonist of this episode, and I think this is the first time he's actually had a major role. He works as a selfish, dickish, asshole villain, but at the end of the episode, Lincoln and Clyde do get their revenge on him, and it's nice to see him get what he deserves. In terms of the comedy, it's okay. There were a few jokes that made me laugh, but there were a few that I didn't really laugh at all. I think it's just mostly the plot itself that makes up for this episode. Overall, I'm gonna put this episode in the glory house. Not too much to say about it, but honestly, I can't really think of what else to say about it. It's just a simple, nice episode that gets its execution down really well. Episode 28B, The Old and the Restless. Lincoln takes his grandfather Pop out for the day after seeing how tame he's become at the retirement home. We first saw Pop in the episode Cover Girls from Season 1, but in this episode, we finally get a true taste of Albert's character. That's his real name, by the way. I like seeing Lincoln trying to help his grandfather get into the fun stuff and basically take him out of his actual age zone. There are some good tensions with this episode as well. When they have to get back before curfew, I was constantly at the edge of my seat wondering, oh god, is Albert gonna get back? Is he gonna get kicked out? What the heck's gonna happen to him? That's all helped with the antagonist of this episode, Sue. Sure, some people don't like that she's constantly being bossy and greedy and all that, but it's funny seeing a villain have this much power over these old people and trying desperately to keep her job easier. It's just funny seeing that devilish smirk on her face and how evil she is just to keep her job easy, and how she doesn't give a shit about anyone. It may seem mean to some, I thought it was funny. I also like seeing all the other old characters trying to help Albert out as well. We get to see Scoots in this episode, and just like how she was in For Bros About to Rock, she's a fun character who's constantly getting away, and how Sue is constantly frustrated at her. It's funny seeing Scoots trying to piss her off. And of course, I do like the relationship between Lincoln and Albert. I think they have a good, genuine relationship. How Lincoln is so desperate to help his grandfather and how he wants to make sure he has a good home, but Albert also wants to make sure that he has a fun time so that Lincoln isn't disappointed. Overall, there's just something about this episode that makes it so damn good. Whether it's the charm or the fun or all the funny parts, it's enough to make this episode into the glory house. It's a fun episode that certainly puts a good spin on the whole old people cliche. Episode 29A, Baby Steps. When Clyde thinks his dads are adopting another baby, Lincoln teaches him how to be a good big brother. First off, I'll just say that the plot is not exactly what you think it is. They wouldn't have Clyde's dads have another baby this early in the show, unless they really wanted to. The plot does make it seem like that's what's going to happen, but even when this episode was announced, I knew it wasn't going to happen, and I was right, because at the end of the episode, he doesn't get a new brother, he gets a kitten, which was obvious. But thankfully, it's not an episode where you're just waiting for the ending because you know what's going to happen. What happens in between this episode is a lot of fun. Lincoln teaches Clyde how to be a good big brother by helping his little sisters, and this is very cute. I thought it was adorable seeing Lincoln helping his little sisters, even though the intention was just to help Clyde out. It was cute seeing him helping Lily. It was cute seeing Lincoln playing with the twins. It was just cute stuff. And the episode's plot, aside from the actual premise, isn't actually that predictable. We get into this scene where Clyde is nervous about helping, and then suddenly later he's actually good at doing it. But it turns out at the end it was actually Lincoln paying his sisters to act so easy around Clyde so that he's not nervous around them. I surprisingly actually was not expecting that to happen. It's a good twist on what I thought was going to be a predictable episode. But personally, I think my favorite part of this episode was when Lana was stuck in the tree and Clyde had to help her get down. The reason this scene works is because Lana was not paid by Lincoln to do this, and she's legitimately scared of being up the tree. So Clyde finally decides to put his nervous antics aside and actually help Lana get out of the tree. It was cute seeing them interact with each other, and that hug that Lana gives Clyde afterwards was just adorable. I like episodes that just focus on Clyde when he's not with Lincoln, because not only is he not a funny sidekick, but they actually get some good character development out of him. It was good seeing him learning how to be a good big brother, even though in the end he didn't actually get a little sibling, but it was good to still see him learn how to be a good big brother anyway. This whole episode may seem silly to some, but honestly, I love this episode. I thought it was really well done. Of course I'm gonna put it in the glory house. It's so damn good with what it does. It has all the characters acting well, the story is executed well, it's very adorable. I mean, with an episode focused on the little sisters, of course it's gonna be adorable. A fun episode that puts a predictable plot into a very interesting twist. Episode 29B. Brawl in the family. When Lori and Lenny buy identical dresses from the mall, a fight breaks out in the Loud house, and the sister fight protocol is initiated. I know it sounds like I just got out of crying, but I almost did, guys. I have never seen an episode that made me both really angry and really sad at the same time. Where on earth can I even begin with this train wreck? I absolutely hate the premise behind this episode, because they're trying to make fun of the fact that girls are fighting over something so little like dresses. This is a sexist setup that was done decades ago, and the writer actually thought this would be a good idea. And they're constantly repeating this joke throughout the entire episode. The rest of the siblings are making sure that Lori and Lenny don't accidentally run into each other, because then they'll start arguing with each other. What's worse, this plot setup is only here because they want to have an excuse to have all of the siblings fighting each other. Normally, I'm okay with the siblings fighting, unless it's done in a really stupid way, like it is with this episode. Why? Because it's an incredibly stupid reason why all the siblings are fighting each other. Like I said earlier, it's incredibly sexist and outdated. Also, I want to briefly say that I don't buy Lenny arguing with Lori over a dress. I mean, sure, she's argued with Lori before, but that was for better reasons the other time. In this episode, she's only fighting with Lori because of a dress. This makes Lori and Lenny look like idiots, because I know they wouldn't fight this easily over a dress, especially if they both have the same fucking dress. This doesn't make any sense. Why would they fight if they both have the same dress? It just further explains that this premise is so stupid and dated and sexist. Also, was it really a good idea to have them use the most important places in the house? It's only an excuse to provide some really stupid jokes involving Lincoln suffering from eating a rotten couch bagel to having to vomit in a bucket. Already 2 minutes in, and we already have 2 horribly unfunny jokes that don't help this episode at all. In fact, speaking of the comedy, it is abysmal in this episode. Every attempt at comedy is just, oh, getting this sister to the other room, or something to do with the bucket, or all the siblings fighting each other. How is this supposed to be funny? There's nothing funny about seeing the siblings fighting each other over an incredibly stupid reason. But let's talk about the sister fight protocol. This is the most stupidest protocol I've ever seen in an episode, because what they're trying to say is that if there's a fight, you should never interfere because you'll just make things worse. I'm fine with this moral, except when it's not needed in something like this episode. We already had 2 episodes that involved Lincoln helping his sisters, Project Loud House and Space Invader. Speaking of which, how is Lincoln the only one who doesn't know about the protocol? All of his sisters are aware of it. Yes, even his little sisters. Even Bobby knows about it. Everyone but Lincoln knows about it. How does this even make any sense? The younger sisters know about it, yet he doesn't. They never give any reason for this. They just go along with it because for some reason they want Lincoln to learn a lesson. They need to learn a lesson, not the one who's only trying to fix everything. But then when Lincoln actually tries to help out, he only ends up making things worse. Normally, Lincoln wouldn't have an issue fixing a problem with his sisters. As I've said, he's done this before, but the episode wants to throw those episodes out the window for the sake of Lincoln getting punishment for what he did and learning a lesson out of all this, when it's very clear that he's only trying to help. The writers would not make Lincoln this stupid. Making Lincoln an idiot just flanderizes him. He's not this stupid when it comes to helping his sisters. He's very clever with this thing. Hell, Baby Steps had a whole montage of him helping his little sisters. This doesn't make any sense, especially when they're both sister episodes. And because of Lincoln's idiotic nature, he ends up suffering for everything he does when he's only trying to help out. It's further evident in the next few scenes. We go through more scenes of the sisters getting Lori and Lenny into their rooms without running into each other, and they have to use Lincoln's properties to fix most of it, by using his room to hide one of the sisters from another, or using his blankets to make a divider in Lori and Lenny's room, even though you probably have spare blankets anyway. Having Lincoln being treated like this when he's done nothing wrong isn't funny. It just makes all the sisters look like hypocrites, since they hate it when Lincoln touches their stuff, but it's okay for them to mess around with his things. It's basically a Lincoln torture episode, even though Lincoln never deserved to be tortured. The next day, each of the sisters begin to fight, which is their own fault, by the way. They end up making their own fucking protocol worse. So why should Lincoln be getting so much blame for his actions, or getting tortured for it? Because apparently that's the episode's only attempts at comedy, either Lincoln getting tortured, or some stupid gross out gag in terms of the protocol. Honestly, it's the sisters' fault for making this worse, since they fuck up their own protocol. And worse, the writers throw Lincoln's good skill at making things better out the window. Why did it need to be for this episode? Lincoln's only trying to help like he usually does, yet he acts like an idiot so he can learn a lesson. What did Lincoln do to deserve this? Nothing. Only trying to help. But then there's the thing that really upsets me, and that is the ending. This is the worst ending in the whole show. Not only does this ending not justify anything that's happened throughout this episode, but it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It actually makes me sad. It makes my heart sink. Basically what happens is the fight becomes too much for Lincoln, so he goes to Clyde's place for the night to figure out what to do. When he comes home, all the sisters are back to normal, and the reason for it is pretty stupid. It's because Lincoln wasn't around to try and fix the problem. This is the stupidest reason to have all of the sisters making up. Look, I get it. Sometimes when someone's angry, you need to just let them chill out and sort this out on their own. But you can't make this establishment with a character who always fixes the problems his sisters have. all the sisters were basically saying that Lincoln does nothing but mess things up, because it's basically telling us that the sisters don't care about Lincoln and only view him as some black sheep and nothing else. And what's worse is that Lincoln actually accepts this, and when he does, it honestly makes my heart sink, because it shows that he's okay with this. He's oblivious to this. He doesn't care about what happens. All he cares about is that everything is back to normal, and he basically doesn't care if his sisters see him like a black sheep. Maybe that's the reason why the sisters never informed Lincoln about the protocol, because they view him as a disgrace that only messes things up and makes their situations worse. That's fucking horrible. The writers have forgotten the establishments they made with their characters, and they want us, the viewers, to think Lincoln is a person nobody should care about because he's nothing but a black sheep. That's a horrible way to teach this message, and you gave off such a bad impression that Lincoln is nothing to his family. Fuck the sisters in this episode. They're all a bunch of fucking assholes who act like they're better than Lincoln, and they don't need him at all, and that he doesn't mean anything to them, and they treat this shit as comedy. This isn't funny. Nothing in this episode is funny. Lincoln being treated like a disgrace and having his life ruined for a petty reason is not funny, especially since he's only trying to be the caring brother he has always been, and the sisters don't care about him at all! If it wasn't obvious by this point, I can't fucking stand this episode, and I apologize for getting really angry, but this episode broke me. It's horrible. Everything about it is terrible. The jokes are the worst, the plot is the worst, the characters are at their worst, and the ending just can't be beat with how stupid, horrible, and how fucking sad it is. Of course I'm going to put this episode in the garbage house. That's the most predictable thing I've probably ever done at this point. It's a disgrace to the show that should never be seen by the public. I eventually hope this turns into some Arnold betrays Iggy thing where the episode is never aired again, because quite honestly, it doesn't deserve to be known about or seen ever again. Fuck this episode to hell. Episode 30A, Sweet and Sour. The Loud parents bring the Loud children with them on a weekend holiday as long as they behave themselves. So when I first heard about this episode, I grew really worried, and if you're wondering why, it kinda gave me flashbacks of No Guts, No Glory or Serial Offender, an episode where every character is acting like an idiot and they all act like 5-year-olds. But thankfully, this episode actually manages to tone down the stupid behavior a lot more. It even gives some of the characters their own subplots, like Lenny trying to fill in for a worker named Fritz, or Lincoln and Lucy trying to find this ghost, or of course Luann's usual puns, especially being told at various workers. It does have the siblings being silly, and they're usually giving the parents a hard time, but what actually works with this episode is that not only is the silliness toned down, but the kids actually learn a lesson out of all of this. When they're all called out and the parents are angry at them, the siblings genuinely feel bad for what they did, and they should be. This is what No Guts, No Glory should have done. It should have had all the characters realize their mistakes and try to put their best foot forward. That's what they do in this episode. Once they're caught once, they try to stay in their hotel room, but all of these annoyances come in their way and they end up making things worse again. So when the parents' vacation is actually ruined, although not entirely for the Loud children's reasons, the Loud siblings decide that they're going to stay at Aunt Ruth's and that they're going to let the parents enjoy themselves at home, even setting up the living room like a hotel. I really liked this development coming from the siblings, as we get a rare case where they actually learn their lessons and try to make their parents feel better. And unlike certain other episodes, the antics the siblings do in this episode is actually really fun. It's actually my favorite part of the episode. Seeing all the siblings doing their own usual thing but not causing too much ruckus for us to be annoyed is very fun. I like seeing all the siblings working with each other. I like seeing them get across these annoyances, and I like seeing how their actions unintentionally cause some distress to the parents. And of course the episode is really funny just from the antics alone. We may have gotten a shitty episode that portrays the silliness horribly, but we finally get a good episode that actually does this really well. I'm putting Sweet and Sour in the glory house, and it's definitely an example of how to do silly behavior the correct way. Episode 30B, Back in Black. When Lucy falls in love with Rusty's brother Rocky, she attempts to be normal to win him over. Speaking of normal, can I just say that I think Lucy looks really cute when she's normal? moving on. So first, what I really like about this episode is that Lucy actually falls in love with someone that isn't like goth or dark like she is. She won't hesitate to fall in love with someone even if they're a lot different than her. But her usual antics seem to be scaring Rocky, so she tries to be normal. She dresses like a girl, she looks like a girl, she tries to talk like a girl. These scenes of Lucy trying to be normal are pretty funny because it's amusing seeing her out of her usual character. Every time Lucy tries to act normal, she ends up giving a lot of misery to Rocky. Some may think that's a bit mean-spirited. I thought it was funny, especially since it doesn't play too much like a mean-spirited tone. I also really like the message behind this episode. Being yourself. This message plays out really well because there are certain people out there who want to fall in love with someone and they want to get together with them, but they think that their normal behavior isn't enough for them. I myself know this because I've done a Styx episode about that similar concept. I like the chemistry between Lucy and Rocky in this episode. You can tell that they're not really going to be in a relationship, they're just going to be close friends, and even the episode implies that yes, they're probably just going to be close friends due to their different behaviors. I'll also admit, it was neat seeing Lincoln actually hanging out with someone that wasn't Clyde. I'm not saying him hanging out with Clyde is always a bad thing, it's just that it's nice to see him actually hanging out with someone different than Clyde. If I really had to point a problem I had with this episode, it would probably be the way the other sisters are portrayed. Not Laurie, because she's the one who actually tries to help Lucy throughout the episode. I'm talking about the other sisters. There is one particular scene where all of the sisters are suddenly so quick to help Lucy with her costume. I can understand Laurie or Lenny or Lola doing something like that, but to have all the sisters suddenly want to make Lucy really pretty and cute just doesn't seem right. And I know you could make the argument, oh, but they're her sisters, of course they want to help. It just doesn't seem right for me. But honestly, that's really a small issue. Everything else in this episode works really well. I like the romance, I like the chemistry, I like the character portrayals. It's just a fun and adorable episode. Not really much else for me to say other than the fact that I'm gonna put this episode in the Glory House. Episode 31A, Making the Grade. When Lisa transfers to Lincoln's 5th grade classroom, his social standing is at stake. So we finally get an episode that focuses on Lincoln and Lisa's relationship. And how does it handle it? Kinda weak. Okay, I should say this though, I like the way that this episode ends. I thought it was kinda nice seeing Lincoln and Lisa hanging out together and how she helps all of her kindergarten classmates. It was kind of a cute ending. And I apologize if I'm sounding kinda skeptical about this, but that's really the only positive that I have with this episode. Everything else is just bad, and I'll tell you why. This episode completely misses the point of Lisa's character. She's a character who usually makes these decisions on her own. She's a scientist. She always does what she thinks is best for everyone, even if it doesn't always work. In this episode, Lisa is portrayed as someone who falls under peer pressure. No, I'm not talking about when she's acting normal. I'm talking about what happens before and afterwards. She makes these decisions not because she thought it was good for everyone, not because of her own needs, only because Lincoln told her to do it. If it had just been Lisa deciding to do this stuff, maybe I would have bought it. But the fact that she falls under peer pressure and does this stuff without her own intention, it doesn't seem like this is the Lisa I know. I know she wouldn't do this. I know she wouldn't fall under peer pressure. But she does in this episode. She does all this stuff based off Lincoln's requests, and it just doesn't seem like her character to me. And when Lisa is acting normal, it is so annoying. I liked that Lucy was acting her way in Back in Black because I thought it was funny, but in this episode, it is so cringeworthy. We see Lisa doing the usual kid stuff, like she says the cool slang, she farts, she high-fives, she does all the stuff that she wouldn't do. I don't have a problem with this, except that when people question why she does this stuff, she instantly puts the blame on Lincoln. And I absolutely despise these scenes. It makes Lisa look very unlikable, and she's only doing this stuff because, hey, Lincoln told me to do it, you have to blame him for it. This is more noticeable at home, where all the sisters are trying to ask Lisa to help her with something, but when she doesn't do it, she just says, oh, it's Lincoln's fault, so blame him for it. I understand that Lincoln was the one who told Lisa to do this, but that doesn't mean he should be punished for what he did. It's clearly her fault for falling under peer pressure. And hey, she's at home. She doesn't have to act that way. She can help her sisters the normal way. She's taking this way too seriously. I'm sorry, but I can't stand how Lisa is portrayed in this episode. Lisa's never been one of my favorite characters on the show, and that's not the reason why I don't like her here. Sometimes she can be portrayed really well, but she's portrayed horribly in this episode because it misses the point of her character. This doesn't look like a scientist that I'm seeing. It looks like someone who's just falling under peer pressure, and when questioned, she blames other people for it. This is just super annoying, and like I said, misses the point of Lisa's character. This isn't a scientist, it's just a moron. And with that said, I'm putting this episode in the garbage house. I don't care if people say that, oh no, Lisa was portrayed fine in this episode. I don't buy it. She was portrayed badly in this episode. This isn't Lisa, like I said before, it's just a normal moron. Episode 31B, Vantastic Voyage. When Lynn Sr. buys a new van for the family, he becomes too attached and protective of it. Vantastic Voyage? I usually like to call this Homespun 2.0. And I'm not kidding, guys. I sometimes refer to this episode by that name. Because here's my biggest problem with this episode. It feels like Homespun all over again. And that wouldn't be a bad thing to some. I'm sure some would be happy that it's like Homespun, since a lot of people really like that episode, myself included. But unlike Homespun, where everything fit naturally and was genuine, this episode just doesn't have the same feeling. The only reason that the siblings want the old Vanzilla back is only because Lynn Sr. is so obsessive. They say good things about the old van even though it's not for a good reason. They're only saying that because, hey, we want to ride the van but our dad won't let us. Seriously, they actually like the old Vanzilla? I don't buy it. With Homespun, I could at least understand why the siblings liked their house because, it was a nice place and it had a lot of positives to outweigh the negatives. With Vanzilla, I can't say the same thing for it. It seems like it has more negatives than positives. And speaking of Lynn Sr., well, he had a few amusing moments, but for the most part, I was kind of annoyed by his behavior. Not super annoyed, but just kind of annoying. We also get this subplot with Lori and Lenny and this driver instructor guy, and they drive around taking advantage of things, and I like that we get his voice actor. I'm a genuine fan of the voice actor behind this guy, but what does this subplot even have to the episode? Is it just because Lori and Lenny don't like the new van and they're taking advantage of this? What a way to rub in the fact that this episode doesn't even seem genuine at all. In terms of positives, well, okay, I loved Lola's scenes in this episode. She was very funny, like how she's standing on top of the van and waving, to the part where she's knocked off by a tree branch and she complains about it later, or the scene where she and Lana are trying to sing a song and she'll tell anyone to stay because she worked for 3 hours on it. Lola's scenes were easily the best thing about this episode, but since that was only like 3 or 4 scenes, that's not really a good sign. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to put this episode in the garbage house. Again, not the worst episode, it had some positives in it, but for the most part, it just didn't feel genuine to me. Episode 32A, Patching Things Up. Lana and Lola try out for Blue Ball Scouts, but they soon discover that one of them might be better suited for it than the other. One word I can use to describe this episode is adorable. I love this episode, primarily for the plot involving Lola and Lana. These two work off each other great in this episode. It's kind of like Intern for the Worst, where they're trying to compete against each other. But with this episode, I like seeing Lola and Lana do this kind of stuff, as this Blue Ball Scout stuff fits their character more often. And of course, I liked the chemistry between Lana and Lola. Sure, they had their differences and they were angry at each other, but for the most part, they didn't care about that. They cared that they had each other. It was just so adorable and very good development with their character. And the comedy's done really well too. I love the reactions that Lola has when she tries to do things that she's not usually used to. It's just super funny. A lot of the comedy in this is just perfect. So I would have called this a perfect episode, but there's only one problem with it, and it's kind of a big problem. Lincoln and Clyde have a subplot where they're trying to get the Bluebell Scouts cookies. cookies. And I'm sorry, but this subplot doesn't have anything to do with the actual episode. You could argue that this subplot is here because they want to have Lincoln actually appear in the episode and have a good amount of screen time, but just because Lincoln's the main character doesn't mean he has to take up a good chunk of the episode. You can just have him at the house waving goodbye to Lola and Lana. That's all you need. And the comedy in this subplot isn't even funny. It's just them trying to get their cookies and they fail at doing it, and at the end they don't actually get the cookies. It's very unfunny stuff, and it really sucks because if it wasn't there, I would have loved this episode and put it as one of my top 5 favorites. But as it is, I still really like this episode. The subplot may be annoying, sure, but everything else more than makes up for it. I'm gonna put this episode in the glory house. It's so damn adorable, so damn fun, and so damn funny. Except for that subplot. Episode 32B, Cheater by the Dozen. When Lincoln and Clyde suspect that Bobby's cheating on Lori, they follow him around town gathering evidence. And we all know what's gonna happen in this episode. They think Bobby's cheating on Lori, but it turns out he's really not cheating on Lori. Yeah, spoiler alert, I know, but we all knew that was going to happen. When the plot was revealed for this episode, I could instantly predict what was going to happen, and I was correct. And that's one of the episode's biggest problems. The premise is predictable because we've seen this stuff before. We've seen it in plenty other cartoons, and it was done a lot better in those cartoons. Honestly, this feels like a leftover episode from season 1 that they couldn't squeeze in, so they decided, hey, season 2's here, let's just squeeze it into there. It honestly feels more like a season 1 episode to me, and I know it was produced during season 2, but that's honestly what it feels like to me. Second, I honestly couldn't really give a shit about their relationship. I'm gonna say this right now, I've never been a fan of Lori and Bobby's relationship, and this is one of the few episodes where it tackles on their relationship. Personally, if Bobby really did cheat on Lori and they broke up, I honestly wouldn't have given a shit, because this romance isn't that interesting to me. I'm not saying it because the plot was predictable, I'm saying I just don't like their relationship, and I hope the writers aren't gonna continue doing this for season 3. In terms of the comedy, it's just really unfunny. Most of it is just Lincoln and Clyde suspecting on Bobby, but it turns out he's cheating with another girl, and there's another girl, and there's someone else he hangs out, and then there's this guy, for some reason they think he has a crush on. Wait, what? There's also a few scenes where the sisters are helping them out. As established, I don't think many of the sisters really give a shit about Lori and Bobby's relationship at all. I mean, sure, they love Lori, and they do want to make sure that she's happy, but in terms of their relationship, would they really care? They probably do the same thing if Lori was dating someone else, only doing this because they love Lori and they want to make sure that she's happy. I feel like the sisters are only in this episode just because, hey, they want to fill in the runtime, I guess. If there's anything I liked about this episode is that I was at least glad that Lori was appreciative, that her siblings were helping her and looking out for her, but that's really only a small positive. With all that tallied up, I'm gonna put this episode in the average house. Did you think I was gonna put it in the garbage house? Look, here's the thing. Despite all of the negatives that I just said, this episode at worst is harmless. Sure, it's not needed and it's already been done before, but in terms of an actual episode, it's harmless, and for what it tries to offer, I'm sure some people would like it, but for the most part, it was just boring and predictable. Episode 33A, Lock and Loud. The Loud siblings decide to take security to the next level after Lynn Sr. tells them to lock the door every night. If you wanted to ask me what one of the funniest episodes of The Loud House were, especially when it comes to season 2, I think this would have to be one of them. I love seeing all of the siblings trying to make their own defensive ways of protecting the house, and how most of the characters get their own chance to shine of doing that job. And when the situation gets even more hectic, the siblings continue taking it to even more levels, which ends up putting a real situation in front of Lynn Sr., since he was the one that told them to do this, and, well, they kinda took it too far. This episode is just funny. There are so many jokes in this episode that I thought were funny. Probably the highlight of the jokes for me would have to be creepy Lisa returning from Study Muffin. I loved seeing that creepy face of her from Study Muffin, and the fact that it's in this episode twice, by the way, is a real joy to see. Also, I guess when you really think about it, it makes sense that the siblings are taking the security to the next level, as it appears that Royal Woods has a really low crime rate. Yeah, it doesn't look like they're that great at catching criminals, especially if it reports that there are so many of them. I was actually really shocked when I found out that Lynn Sr. was the one who ended up planning the robbery, quote-unquote robbery, of Mr. Grouse, and how he pays him with muffins and actually to fake out the siblings so that they learn a lesson out of all of it. But in the end, Lynn Sr. ends up getting a taste of his own medicine for tricking the kids. If there was anything I didn't like about this episode, the one thing that bothered me a few times here was the fact that Lenny fell in love with a mannequin. Now, in my opinion, I don't think Lenny would do something like this. You may think she's stupid, but I know she's not 100% stupid. She's ditzy, she's a bit of an airhead, and I know that, yes, she can have her stupid moments, but in Season 1's case, it was at least played to the point where she wasn't fully aware of a situation and wasn't entirely sure what the heck's going on or what makes sense around here. In this episode, you can clearly see that it's a mannequin, and Lenny falls in love with it, wishing that she had run off to Mexico with it. I'm sorry, but I don't care what people think about this. I didn't think it was funny, and it just seems off with Lenny's character, since I know she wouldn't do something like this. I mean, you could argue, oh, but she thought Lily was an actual squirrel in Driving Miss Hazy, but in that episode's case, it was at least very convincing that Lily looked like a giant freak squirrel, so I could buy that. But aside from that, the rest of the episode makes up for it. There's so many great moments of comedy, and the characters each get their own chance to shine. I'm gonna put this episode in the Glory House. It's definitely a lot of fun. Oh, and while you're at it, keep the Glory House protected, because I have a feeling that these good episodes are going to be robbed by the ones who want to stay in the Glory House. Episode 33B, The Whole Picture. When Lincoln accidentally deletes all of his childhood photos, him and Clyde tried to recreate them. So when I first heard about the premise to this episode, I was honestly really excited, because I thought we were finally going to get an episode into a small glimpse of Lincoln's childhood. In a show about a large family, this was inevitable to happen, and with a premise like this, I was excited to see what they were going to do with it. But what they end up doing with this episode is just really, really unfunny. We barely get any glimpse at Lincoln's childhood, only at the beginning and only at the ending. The middle of the episode is just Lincoln and Clyde trying to recreate the photos because Lincoln deleted them. These scenes are really unfunny. The reason it doesn't work here is because they repeat the same joke over and over again. Clyde, or one of Lincoln's friends, is trying to impersonate the sisters, but they're not good at doing it, and as a result, the image ends up getting fucked up, but Lincoln still thinks it's good anyway. I personally didn't think this joke was that funny, because, well, they repeat it over and over again, and it wasn't really a good running gag to begin with. And on top of that, did we really need this kind of story? This is an episode where it dives into Lincoln's childhood, and most of the episode is just them trying to recreate it. Sure, I think it's understandable in Lincoln's situation because he doesn't want to lose his childhood memories, but clearly there was a better way of doing it. And they try to do that with the ending, where Lincoln's sisters tell him about childhood memories, but this is honestly another big problem that I have with this episode. Why do I have a problem with this? Because all of the memories that they talk about seem to be really, really embarrassing. And I know that Lincoln wasn't exactly bothered by this, but I don't think a real-life person would actually accept these kind of embarrassing memories. And I say that because there's not any memory in this episode that seems heartwarming. Embarrassing moments are supposed to also be outnumbered by the heartwarming memories. If the episode had done that, I would have loved it a lot more. But instead, the sisters just end up telling Lincoln about memories that they thought were embarrassing and they thought it was funny, even though I don't think the audience thought they were very funny either. As embarrassing as the memories are, I didn't think they were funny. The only time we get some cute memories with Lincoln and his sisters is at the beginning of the episode when he's actually going through the pictures. If the ending maybe had Lincoln deciding he doesn't want to remember those memories because he thought they were embarrassing, but the sisters end up telling him a bunch of good memories, then maybe that would have been a much better moral for the episode. You may think your memories are embarrassing, but you also have to remember that there's a lot of times where it was actually really sweet and heartwarming. Instead, this episode just goes with the moral that, oh, your memories will always be in your head, which I don't really buy, because would Lincoln really remember all of those moments the sisters were telling him? I guess when you really get down to it, the episode's not bad, it's just really disappointing. The middle part is stupid, but I didn't think it was awful, and if you really like seeing Lincoln being embarrassed by these memories, I guess you'll like this episode fine, but in my opinion, I thought it was just really stupid. It's not a bad episode, but it was certainly really disappointing. Gonna put this one in the average house. Episode 34. No such luck. When Lincoln is claimed to have bad luck, he gets a lot of free time to himself, at least for a little bit. So, we're only 2 seasons in, and we already have what is regarded as the most controversial episode and probably most hated episode of the whole show. This episode kinda fucked up the fan base, because now the fan base is totally upset with this episode, and if they see any glimpse of Lincoln being tortured, even if it was for his own reasons, they're gonna lose their shit. But more importantly, do I think this episode is bad? Well, yeah. It's a bad episode. I'm just gonna say it. This is going into the garbage house. But, with that said, I don't think this is one of the worst episodes of all time. I figure it's best I start out with the positives. I like that little montage of Lincoln convincing his sisters that it's bad luck. It's kind of amusing, and it also seems cute that some of his sisters don't actually believe it until he actually tells them. And unlike certain other episodes, Lincoln at least does something to deserve his punishment. He pretty much lied to all of his sisters, and even at one point broke Laurie's golf clubs just so he can prove that he was bad luck. And in the end, he ended up getting what he deserved. Sort of. That's honestly one of the biggest problems that I have with this episode, the punishment that Lincoln gets. If his punishment had just been him missing out on certain activities and being forced to stay at home, that would have been fine, because then maybe you would show that the parents and the siblings are also at fault because they're leaving Lincoln on his own where he could potentially be in danger. Like, for example, what if someone tried to rob the house or someone kidnapped him? In that sense, you could also make both of them responsible for what they did, and both of the sides would learn a lesson. But instead, this episode wants to make the siblings look like they're the good guys and Lincoln the antagonist. And while I understand he kind of deserved it since he lied to them, I don't think this punishment was really needed. The punishment itself is way too much. Lincoln is kicked out of his room, and as a result, he's forced to sleep outside, and when the family actually realizes this, they lock him outside. They even make him eat his breakfast outside. So essentially, the family is making Lincoln look homeless. I also take note to this because this episode was written by the same writer behind A Ties That Bind, the episode that showed that the parents would never kick out any of their children, and yet here they are kicking out Lincoln, all because they think he has bad luck. In doing this kind of punishment, you're also making the family look like a bunch of idiots. Not because they believe the bad luck, that was all on Lincoln's part, but it's the fact that they don't give a shit about him after what happens. I get it, they think he's bad luck, but just in that sense, you should also care about your siblings as well. They play up the family's levels to levels of stupid. They basically don't care about Lincoln, they only care about themselves. This is further evident because when Lincoln tries to tell his siblings that he doesn't have bad luck, Lynn ends up calling him out, thinking that he still has bad luck because she won a bunch of games, and as a result, the family still thinks he has bad luck, even trying to get him away from the house as far as he can. Oh, and speaking of Lynn, let's talk about her for a second. I've been calm and collected when it comes to talking about Lynn, despite her being my least favorite character. But no, this is my breaking point. This is the definitive episode where I am constantly asking myself, why the fuck is Lynn the most popular character and well-loved character on the show? I said before that Lincoln was partly at fault for lying to everyone, but let's not forget that Lynn was pretty much the jerkwad that started this whole shit from the first place. We start off with her threatening Lincoln to come to her baseball game, and then when she actually loses, she immediately thinks that he is bad luck. A, this was her fault to begin with, and B, she gets no punishment for this at all. Lynn doesn't admit that she did this in the first place. The closest she does is apologize to Lincoln, but even with that, she doesn't get any punishment for what she did. She's pretty much the definitive reason why Lincoln is in this scenario. If she hadn't have told him that he was bad luck, Lincoln would have never done this. And like I said earlier, even when Lincoln tries to tell everyone, she still points him as bad luck, and everyone instantly believes her. Fuck you, Lynn. Fuck you sideways. I seriously cannot understand why she's still the most loved character on the show. She doesn't deserve it. Even people who like Lynn said that she was the worst thing about this episode, and they're right. She is the worst thing about this episode. Despite all the punishment, despite all the stupid shit, she is without any doubt the worst thing about this episode. But maybe that's further backed up by the ending. Oh my god, I cannot stand this ending. Lincoln decides that he's going to go to Lynn's baseball game dressed up as a squirrel mascot, and then when Lynn actually wins, he reveals that he was the one in the squirrel costume, and the family immediately apologize to him, until the moment of sincerity is completely kicked out the window with Rita's line, "We sold all your furniture." Yup, while Lincoln was having bad luck, the family sold his stuff. This just makes them look even more idiotic for what they did. Do you seriously think pieces of furniture touched by the person you think has bad luck would actually affect you too? I hate this line because not only does it kill off the sincerity we actually got with this episode, especially since Lynn, for once, is actually apologizing and giving a shit about her brother, all of a sudden they cut off that line because they want to be funny. This isn't funny. This isn't meant to be funny. You can't take Lincoln's bad luck as comedy. It's not funny. There's nothing funny about seeing Lincoln being treated like this. And you think after all of this, the family's gonna learn their lesson and let Lincoln join in? Nope. Once that stupid line is out of the way, it's revealed that the family only take Lincoln with them just so he can wear that squirrel suit because now they think he has good luck. Even if Lincoln sets one foot out of that suit, they instantly think he has bad luck again. Once again, writers, you're making the family look like idiots for the sake of comedy. It's not funny, and the fact that Lincoln ends this episode with a sad look on his face doesn't help this episode at all. You're leaving off a sour note on what could have been a good ending, but instead, nope, you had to fuck it up with your stupid comedy. Nothing in this episode is funny. There's not a single joke in this episode that's funny. It's just like Brawl and the Family. Nothing is funny. But like I said earlier, as much as I really, really hate this episode, I don't think it's one of the worst. In fact, I'll say this right now, Lincoln's punishment, even though it was really stupid, isn't as bad as Brawl and the Family, because in that episode, he didn't do anything to deserve his punishment. At least, he got some sort of punishment in this episode for what he did. It's just too bad that the punishment was completely fucked up because they wanted to play up the levels of stupidity with the family and ended up making Lynn look like an absolute jerk. Again, I don't think this is one of the worst episodes of all time. I think it's a little bit overhated, but I do think it deserves some level of backlash for how stupid it is. There was clearly an easier way of making this episode good, but instead, we got a miserable episode that wasn't funny in the slightest. Episode 34B, Frog Wild. When Lana finds out Lincoln's class is planning to dissect frogs, the two set off on a rescue mission. Now here we have an episode that I first saw once and didn't really think too much of it. I saw the episode when it came out, which was around the same time that No Such Luck came out, and it was definitely a refresher. I thought it was a good episode, but I didn't think it was anything amazing. But rewatching it today, I actually think the episode is a lot better than I remember it. I actually consider it to be Lana's best episode. The first thing I love about this episode is the suspense. Lincoln and Lana are trying to save the frogs, and we get the debut of Principal Huggins, who comes over to their house and tries to find them. I was literally at the edge of my seat with this episode. I didn't know what was going to happen. Whether is he going to find the frogs, or the frogs going to be free? I wasn't sure, and yeah, I was still at the edge of my seat hoping for the best. And I also really liked the message behind this episode, that you should always respect animals' rights to live. It doesn't Doesn't matter if animals aren't like humans, all animals deserve their own right to live. They're just like us. They want to survive and they want to live lives. Some have families and they just want to have the right to live. I find it really sickening that a lot of people don't respect animals' right to live. All animals, even wild animals, deserve their own right to live. Plus, this episode shows that even certain animals are really charming. This episode shows how Lana met Hops, and I think the two have a really close relationship with each other. It was adorable seeing those two getting along and how it ended up being the result of how all the characters would end up actually giving a shit about the frogs. I also love the team up between Lincoln and Lana. Seeing the two work off each other and working together to save the frogs is fun stuff, and it helps to the episode's suspension. The comedy is really good too. I've heard people complaining that they don't like how Lana was literally eating from the trash, but I didn't mind it because this is her character. I also love that innuendo at the end where the kids were all watching the frogs in their new home and one of the kids asked, "What are those two frogs doing?" In my opinion, this episode just shows everything that makes Lana a great character, and of course this episode is going into the glory house. Maybe I can find a little spot for all the frogs to stay. Episode 35A, Kick the Bucket List. Lincoln and Clyde try to do all the activities on their spring break list before the last day of spring break ends. I have a question. Who wants to see an episode where Lincoln and Clyde are constantly doing a bunch of activities and seeing them having fun? Yeah, I didn't really think so. Don't get me wrong, I understand that this is the premise of the episode, and even some of the activities that Lincoln and Clyde do actually do in this episode are pretty funny. It's even great seeing Scoot's return in this episode. Like I said, she's starting to grow on me as a character. And I thought that little montage at the end with Lincoln and Clyde spending their last few hours together on the last day, and eventually capping it off with them just chilling back, I thought it was a really nice ending. For the most part. I'll get to that in just a second. It's just that, for the most part, that's all this episode is. Just Lincoln and Clyde doing a bunch of activities and struggling to get them all done. It may seem interesting to some. To me, I was mostly bored with this episode. The comedy was there, but there wasn't really much of it. And just like Lock and Loud, we got another quote-unquote glorious joke of Lenny thinking something is actually someone she knows. In this case, Clyde draws Lincoln on a rock, and she thinks it's actually Lincoln. Yay. Also, the exaggeration of this episode wasn't really funny to me. There's this whole scene where Lincoln and Clyde are spending their time alone, and basically they won't let other people join because it's a Lincoln and Clyde thing. I understand that this was their intention of feeling like they were trying to do something that each other loves, but in my opinion, it just wasn't that funny. Also, I fucking hated that bird. It's constantly showing up and it has a huge vendetta against Lincoln, and they try to play this shit as comedy. I don't see what's funny about seeing a bird having a huge vendetta against Lincoln, and it even shows up at the end. What the fuck? Where the hell did the bird come from? It's just suddenly at the Loud house when Lincoln goes inside. All of a sudden, the bird is there. How did it get there? We never get any explanation how it managed to get there in the first place. Yeah, as much as I like the ending, I really hated that it was cut off by a really stupid moment. Just like No Such Luck. There are some high points, there's some low points, but for the most part, I was just bored with this one. This episode is going into the ARGGH house. Not really too much to say about it. If you just want to see an episode about Lincoln and Clyde doing a bunch of activities and seeing them genuinely having fun, I guess you'll like this episode. But if you're looking for something spectacular, this isn't really the episode you're looking for. Episode 35B, Party Down. Lori throws a sophisticated party, but it backfires when her guests don't like what she has planned. This episode isn't exactly story-based. It's a very simple premise with a very simple execution. And from the start, yeah, I kind of knew what was going to happen. Lori throws a party, her siblings end up making it fun, but when she kicks them out, the party goes downhill. Like I said, the episode isn't particularly story-based, but at the same time, sometimes episodes don't have to be story-based as long as they're really fun. And I know I complained earlier that Kick the Bucket List wasn't really that interesting, seeing Lincoln and Clyde doing all those activities together, but in that case, I just didn't think the episode was interesting. In this case, I thought it was fun. I loved the ending to this episode, seeing all of the siblings having a party together and Lori's guests coming back and eventually the parents coming in and everyone's doing their own things to enjoy themselves. Everyone's having fun. Everyone's being silly. This is what makes a party episode a lot of fun. And even before we get to the actual ending, there's a lot of positives as well. I like the comedy in this episode. It finally gives Luna some spotlight, since she hasn't really been used much in the previous episodes. I like seeing Laurie's younger siblings trying their hardest to make the party fun, and yet they end up getting backlash for it and eventually kicked out. Again, the episode just has a nice tone. There's not really anything too mean-spirited, there's not anything that annoys me. It's just a fun episode. Sometimes if you're making an episode about a party, it doesn't always have to be story-based as long as you can make the episode fun. And I really like Laurie in this episode. She does act selfish throughout the first half, but she learns her lesson and she decides to join the siblings' party upstairs. This is one of those episodes where it looks like that Laurie wants to grow up and that she wants to be a mature adult, but that she's not quite ready yet and she should enjoy her time with her siblings. So yeah, in general, I'm gonna put this episode in the glory house. I don't care if there's not much storytelling here, I just had too much fun without. And it's great seeing the characters being used here and everyone having a fun time, just being themselves. It's a fun episode that, like I said, isn't particularly story-based, but it's just too much fun, I can't help but love it. Episode 36A, Fed Up. Tired of eating the same 7 dinners every day of the week, the Loud kids try to sabotage Lynn Sr.'s cooking so they can order a pizza. So now we're getting into the first of those episodes where the siblings are all teaming up against someone, and in the end they end up learning their lesson because of it. There's quite a number of episodes that do that, but I really like this episode regardless. I like seeing the siblings' different attempts to try and sabotage their father's dinner. It's funny, it's creative, and it gives each character a chance to shine. What I also like about this episode is that both sides have their own reasons of motivations for wanting dinner their way, but thankfully it doesn't actually take sides. And I think that's good enough for the episode. No one character is a good guy or a bad guy. They're both at flaws and they both learn their lesson. And in the siblings' case, it's kind of a messy situation, since they all try their own ways of making dinner and it ends up going downhill, and of course the dinner turns out to be awful. There's just so many scenes of great comedy in this episode. I love seeing all of the siblings get their chances to shine, whether it's something complicated or something as simple as Lily tripping Lynn Sr. And of course, I love seeing Lynn Sr. being his silly goofball self, like, "Someone explain why I'm wearing my goulash?" The ending is also great too, as both sides end up winning with both of their wishes fulfilled. I'm definitely gonna put this episode in the glory house. This is certainly a great meal to enjoy. Episode 36B, Shell Shocked. Lincoln and Ronnie Ann have to take care of an egg as a school project, but Lincoln does not trust the chaotic Ronnie Ann to take care of the fragile egg. I'll just say off the bat, this story's predictable. From the start, I could already tell what was going to happen. Lincoln's worried that Ronnie Ann's gonna break the egg, but it turns out she actually has some sweetness to her and that she's not really going to break the egg. And of course, that's going to put a feud between their friendship and Lincoln has to fix himself. This story was really predictable. And that's kind of one of the episode's biggest problems. It's predictable, but thankfully everything else more than makes up for it. I like seeing the funny interactions between Lincoln and Ronnie Ann. This episode clearly establishes that these two are friends, and I 100% accept that. I do like the interactions between Lincoln and Ronnie Ann. I think they have a genuine friendship with each other, which is certainly more convincing than them actually being in a relationship. As predictable as the story is, I also thought it was legitimately heartbreaking when Ronnie Ann told Lincoln to leave after she found out that he replaced the real leg with a fake one. There were also some other moments I really enjoyed as well. I like seeing Clyde spending his time with Penelope. Seriously, he's more suited for her than Laurie. And of course I love seeing Lincoln being so damn worried about his egg. Maybe he'll be a great father someday. But I think what I really like about this episode is Ronnie Ann herself. Unlike the episodes in season 1, she's actually not used as a plot device. She's used as an actual character. She is aggressive towards Lincoln, but we do get to know about her caring side. She cares a lot about her family, she's always helping Bobby's work clothes and injuries, and she even cooks for her family. I'm so glad that we finally get an episode which actually develops Ronnie Ann's character instead of using her as a plot device. With all these thoughts tallied up, I'm gonna put this episode in the glory house. Sure, the story's predictable, but everything else makes up for it. I like Ronnie Ann's development, I like seeing the interactions between these two, and I like the moral of this episode as well. You can always trust others, especially if you know that they have a good heart. Episode 37A, Pulp Friction. Lincoln and Clyde submit an ace-savvy comic to meet the creator contest, but are foiled by a surprising nemesis. That nemesis being Principal Huggins, who makes his return from Frogwild. But before I get into that, I should discuss about probably the best thing about this episode, the opening sequence. Man, man, I love this opening. The way the sisters look in their outfits is so cool. I love seeing using their powers to defeat the bad guy. It's just a great opening, and it feels like I'm watching a Marvel movie. The action's there, the comedy's there. It's just a great opening, and the animation is fantastic. Unfortunately, after that opening, in my opinion, the episode kinda goes downhill, and I feel like that's gonna piss a lot of people off because a lot of people really like this episode. I'll talk about the thing that bothers me most later, but first I should probably discuss about the other negatives. Most of the episode was boring. It was just Lincoln and Clyde trying to submit their comic, but Principal Huggins keeps getting in the way. They're trying various ways of trying to outrace each other. It's kinda boring. I suppose I did like the ending though, how Principal Huggins reveals his backstory, and I do genuinely feel sorry for him. It was even cool seeing him actually teaming up with Lincoln and Clyde in their next comic. But personally, there's one thing about this episode that kind of bothers me, and I don't know if this is just me overthinking things, but I don't like the way the sisters were portrayed in this episode. It's not because they do anything particularly mean, it will never be like Luther Consequences, but it's the fact that their reasons for helping Lincoln just seem selfish and really formulaic and stereotypical. Throughout this episode, I was constantly thinking to myself, why would they be helping Lincoln? Is it because they wanted to make up for him for what they did in Luther Consequences? Is this some sort of sequel episode? No, to me, it feels like the only reason they're helping is because they want to become famous. Now again, I could be overthinking things because these were just 2 lines said by Lola, but at the end of the episode you can clearly see how exaggerated the sisters are being about them being in the comic. Also, I don't buy how all the sisters would suddenly want to be in an Ace Savvy comic, especially since they don't like Ace Savvy. If Lincoln was just doing this to show to all of his friends or something like that, I don't think they would have let him do it. But when a big popular creator is involved, they suddenly want to be in it because they want to be recognized and be famous for their roles. I'm not sure if this is what they were going for or whether I'm just overthinking things, but personally, it's just something that kind of bothers me. I know a lot of you probably thought I was going to put this episode in the Glory House, but honestly, I'm just going to throw it into the Average House. I know this may upset a lot of people because this episode is loved by a lot, but in my opinion, I just thought it was alright. Aside from that opening sequence, everything else was either boring or really annoying. The sisters' motivations just kinda bugged me, and everything else didn't really make up for it. Episode 37B, Pets Peeved. When Lana brings home a new pet, whom the children adore, the 4 original Loud pets scheme to get rid of him. I never thought we would actually get an episode about the Loud pets, but after watching this episode, I'm glad we got one. This episode rarely has any dialogue, and that's mostly because it's focused on the pets. It kind of plays like a Tom and Jerry episode, where it's focused on these animals, and they're trying to do something without any dialogue, well, mostly no dialogue throughout the episode. I like seeing the Loud pets work together, and their ways of trying to get rid of the new pet were really funny. But I think the highlight for the comedy would have to go to the commercial for the Pets Pound. They show these animals as being upset and lonely and all that, and they try to portray it as something happy and cheery. This commercial made me piss my pants with laughter. It was one of the funniest moments of the season. I also kind of like that running gag where Luna thought that the dog's butt was its head, and Lana's like, Luna, that's his butt. I don't know if it seemed gross to some or silly. I thought it was kind of amusing. I guess the one thing I was kind of bothered by this episode was the ending, where the new pet ends up being taken by its real owner. I understand they don't really like to add new core characters to the show, but I thought it would be kind of cute to see Watterson as a regular Loud pet. I understand that it was a lost dog, and I knew this was going to happen, but still, it would have been nice if the dog was actually adopted. Maybe this is just a sick person within me, but I don't know. It would have been nice to see a new pet added to the family. But honestly, that's just a small nitpick. This episode makes up for it with so many positives that earn its spot in the Glory House. Episode 38A, Potty Mouth. When the siblings heard Lily swear, they decide to change their behavior for her future. Oh boy, we finally get an episode about swearing. In case you guys don't know, I love episodes that are about swearing. SpongeBob and The Simpsons have done this before, and they were amazing at doing it. And I guess it's no surprise that this is one of the funniest episodes of The Loud House. It's clear that Lily only said a line that wasn't really that offensive, and yet the siblings are so damn shocked that their baby sister is swearing. So we get into all of these great scenes where all the siblings are trying to change up for their behavior, and I honestly really like this, because this is one of the few times where the siblings are actually making up for their mistakes in the past, unlike other episodes where they barely learn their mistakes at all. At least in this episode, it doesn't feel like Lily is being used as a tool, because in other episodes, the only reason why the siblings are trying to fix their mistakes is all because of Lily and nothing else. While yes, that may apply to this episode, this was a situation that happened from the very start of the episode, so I can buy this concept. There were other great comedy moments as well. I love seeing Lisa trying to pose as Lily, and she does all these smart things which makes the teacher seem very shocked. I also really like the ending too, for two reasons. Number one, I thought it was adorable how Lily was not actually saying dang it, she said donut, because every time she saw a donut on the TV, she wanted to have one, and that's why she ended up saying donut. This makes sense for Lily. Sometimes babies are really hard to understand, and I just thought it was absolutely adorable how Lily wanted a donut and that she wasn't actually swearing. Or at least she ends up swearing, which is the second reason why the ending's so great, because it turns out Lily actually does end up swearing. This ending, man, it is one of the funniest endings of the whole show, if not the funniest. Just how after all of this, how Lily seemed to be such a precious baby, she suddenly swears, and it's actually bleeped out. This kinda makes sense too, because there's a montage early on in the episode where the siblings are swearing, but it seems like they're saying damn it, but it turns out they're actually bleeped out, which could lead to the fact that they're actually saying something else. Also, in one of the moments, Lincoln is playing on a Wii. That's an instant win for me. Overall, I just really liked this episode. The comedy is on point, and it was just adorable. Of course, I'm gonna put this episode in the goddamn motherfucking glory house. Episode 38B, L is for Love. A love letter addressed to Loud shows up at the Loud House, and the siblings have to figure out who the letter in question is for. Guys, honestly, saying I love this episode is kind of predictable at this point, but honestly, what else can I say? I freaking love this episode so damn much. And there's so many reasons why. Number one, all of the siblings get their own chance to shine. It's so cute seeing them interacting with their love interests and how they're so shy about showing their affection to them. We get to see all the siblings interacting with their love interests, and not only are these moments funny, but they're also cute, because it's great seeing the siblings trying to open themselves up and actually learning about not being so shy and opening yourself up to other people. The comedy is fantastic. I can't think of one joke in this episode where I wasn't laughing. The comedy was just great. I'm very thankful that all the siblings are actually being very supportive for each other instead of being overly annoyed that their love interest didn't actually send them something back. I was worried at the start that this was going to be another It's a 4x Loud House going in, but thankfully it wasn't that. I'm very thankful that the siblings were being supportive for each other and they were trying to help each other out by figuring out who the letter was for. I also loved the message behind this episode. Don't be too afraid to admit your feelings for someone, and that'll certainly come in play with the ending, which I'll talk about soon. We also get some backstory with this episode. It turns out that the letter that the siblings received was actually letters sent by Rita to Lynn Sr., because this is the story of how they met. Rita was kind of like the siblings in this episode. She met Lynn Sr., but she was worried about speaking to him, so she decided to slip love letters into his pocket, which of course eventually led to them becoming a married couple. After Rita ends up explaining this story to the siblings, they decide to do the same thing. They all learn their lesson about how they should send letters to express how they feel for someone. This is something I think a lot of people should learn too. If there's someone you like in real life, just send them a letter, and I'm sure they'll respond back, especially if you're very shy. The episode does a great job at teaching that moral. But of course, I figure it's time I talk about one of the reasons why this episode is so loved. What they did with Luna. In this episode, Luna admits that she has a crush on a person named Sam, and throughout she's acting really nervous and embarrassed about telling everyone about her crush and how she thinks she's not the right person for Sam. But then towards the end of the episode, they all think that Luna was the one that got the letter, so she decides to be the one to go out on the date. And Luna's the first sibling who learns that she should send the letter to their crushes, which eventually encourages all the siblings to do the same thing. So they all decide to send their letters, especially Luna. She tries to send the letter to her crush, and this is when we get into the big game changer. The person Luna has a crush on and spends a lot of the segment shy to admit her feelings for, Sam, turns out to be a girl. Yes, Luna is a lesbian, or bisexual if you want to consider Study Muffin. This ending works perfectly with the episode's message. Not only are they using crushes as a way for you to open your feelings towards two with letters, but they're also using LGBT couples as well. The Loud House is not afraid of doing this. They've done this before with Clyde's parents, and now they're doing it with this episode. Some people may think that the Loud House is just doing this because they want to take chances, but honestly, in this kind of episode, I think it works perfectly. I was shocked when it turned out that Sam was a girl, but at the same time, I was also happy about it because they're expressing that message that it's okay to like someone even if they're the same gender as you. I really hope they continue expanding on this with the Loud House. I would love to see more episodes about Sam and Luna together. Maybe you don't have to have them kiss or make out or stuff like that. Just have them spending time together and have them developing their relationship. That would be really great to see, and it would also expand on your great message that you had in this episode. Honestly, if it wasn't obvious at this point, I'm putting this episode in the glory house. I can't think of a single thing wrong with it. It's funny, it's sweet, it's heartwarming, and it teaches us two great messages about love. That you can open up to someone even if you're shy, or you can even open yourself up to someone even if they're the same gender as you. I can't wait to see how the Loud House expands more upon this in the future. Special number 2, episode 39, The Loudest Mission, Relative Chaos. I don't understand why it's called The Loudest Mission. I usually prefer to just call it Relative Chaos. In this episode, Bobby, Ronnie Ann, and their mother decide to visit their crazy extended family for 2 days. During the visit, Bobby manages to fit in perfectly while Ronnie Ann struggles dealing with the smothering nature of her relatives. So we get a full-length episode about family, and surprisingly, it's not even Lincoln's family, it's Ronnie Ann's family, who we've never seen before, and they make their first debut in this half-hour episode. I was actually predicting at one point that this kind of episode was going to happen, especially since Shell Shock shows how caring Ronnie Ann is for her family, which doesn't seem to be very big. I was thinking at one point that maybe this kind of episode was going to happen, and sure enough, I was actually correct. Before I move on to any of the important stuff, I figure I should probably start off with the positives. First off, I love the Casagrandes. They're all full of so much character, so much personality, and each of them play off with each other really well. Sometimes when an episode is about family, you don't just have to use the other family members as plot devices. You can give them their own character, their own personality, their own interests, their own dislikes. Every Casagrande in this episode has a lot of personality. And of course, all the Casagrandes get a laugh from me. Every time they're on screen, I'm just having a joy watching them. Every joke they make is spot on, their voices are great, their designs are wonderful. The Casagrandes are just bursting with personality, and I love them for that. Also, one of the Casagrande family members has Down syndrome. This show just continues to go to next levels. I also love seeing the development that Ronnie Ann goes through in this episode. She doesn't like being with her family, and she desperately tries to get back home, but towards the end of the episode, she realizes that family is more important than anything. The Casagrandes may also be a very hectic family, but they're also very sweet. They give Ronnie Ann her own room, they put stuff on the wall, they give her things that she likes, just to make her feel more comfortable in this hectic neighborhood. And the caring nature of her family is what gives Ronnie Ann the decision to actually stay in the city. Yes, at the end of the episode, Ronnie Ann and Bobby actually move to the city. I could tell from the start why this was a half-hour episode, not because of the whole family tradition, but because that Ronnie Ann and Bobby actually move away at the end of the episode. I've heard a lot of people take criticism with this, but I actually think this was a really smart move. By having the two characters move, you're also giving each character their own development. They may be upset that they won't be able to see their friends again, but they'll be able to live on their happy lives, and soon enough they'll be able to see each other in future episodes. I personally thought it was a good idea that Bobby and Ronnie Ann moved away, because then they could focus more on their lives and what they want to do for the future. Also, let's be honest, most of the people that were angry about this were those that shipped Lincoln and Ronnie Ann. Like I said earlier, I just prefer to see these two as friends and not in an actual relationship. I also felt that the length of this episode was perfect for this kind of storytelling. All of this crammed into an 11-minute episode probably wouldn't have been the best idea, so the fact that it's half an hour gives each character their own moment to shine, and the story flows through the episode really smoothly. There's a lot of things about this episode that I really like, but is it perfect? No, and there's two problems that I have with it. Number one, as sad as it is to see Ronnie Ann and Bobby move, wasn't it a little bit too early to do it? I mean, Ronnie Ann has only been in 4 episodes before this, and now all of a sudden she's moved away. I feel like if there was more episodes focused on these two, then maybe it would have actually been more heartbreaking to see them move. I'm not saying it wasn't heartbreaking when they moved away, I'm just saying if there were more episodes about them before this, then I think it would have made the fact that they moved away a lot more heartbreaking, since a lot of new people would actually see a lot of their episodes and actually feel heartbroken as well. And the second problem, and this is probably the biggest issue with this episode, is Lori. She has her own subplot in this episode where she's desperately trying to make sure that Bobby stays in Royal Woods, and I'm sorry, but I just don't give a shit about their relationship. She's just upset because she doesn't want her precious boyfriend to move away. And it's not till the very end does she realize that he should move away because it would be better for his life so he could focus more on himself. And the episode doesn't give me a reason to care about their relationship. Lori's only angry that Bobby's moving away because he won't be there to see her most of the time. She doesn't care about him focusing on his life. She doesn't care if he wants to feel happier with his own family. She just wants her precious boyfriend to stay with her for the rest of their lives. And she only stops doing this when she realizes that a year later, she and Bobby will go to the same college. That's the reason why she stops, because she'll still manage to see her boyfriend anyway. And every time we see these two together on screen, it is just cringeworthy. There's literally a whole scene of Lori and Bobby crying because they won't be able to see each other for 2 whole days. I understand that this was meant for comedy, but it's not funny, it's just fucking annoying. In total, I just couldn't give a shit about Lori's whole feud with Bobby because, once again, it just shows that she only cares about what makes her happy. She doesn't care about what other people think. However, with that said, I am excited to see what would actually happen if Lori went to college. Maybe they'll have an episode showing her struggling to move away from her family. Is she ready? Is she not? Who knows? Maybe they'll actually make an episode about this. If they do, I'd be excited to see it. So despite those few negatives I pointed out, this is still a very strong episode. I'm definitely going to be putting this one in the glory house. There's just too many good things about it. The Casa Grandes are a lot of fun, the message is strong, the comedy is strong. Really, the only thing that doesn't make it perfect is the fact that it happens a little bit too early, and of course, the whole subplot involving Lori and Bobby. This is still a very good episode, and I do recommend that you check it out. Episode 40A, Out of the Picture. Lincoln and Clyde try to get into the yearbooks, while Lola tries to do a prettier picture for said yearbooks. At first glance, this episode actually really interested me. I thought the reason that Lincoln and Clyde wanted to get into the yearbooks was because maybe they're gonna head for middle school soon. Maybe this is their final year in elementary school and they want to make sure that they're remembered well before they head off. Unfortunately, that's not exactly the implications that this episode gives off. Lincoln and Clyde only want to get into the yearbook just because they want to get into the yearbook. That's literally the only reason. And because of that, the main plot is just really boring. All this episode is just Lincoln and Clyde trying to get into the yearbook, whether it's them trying to join another club or photo editing themselves into another club. That's all this episode is. It's just them desperately trying to get into the yearbook. And unfortunately, their reason for wanting to get into the yearbook just doesn't wow me. If it was because they wanted to head off to middle school soon and wanted to be remembered well, then I would definitely buy it. But no, they just want to get into the yearbook just because they want to get into the yearbook. That's literally the only reason. And when we actually show these two together trying to do this thing, it's just not entertaining. Like I said, it's boring and it's not really that funny. All of that would have probably put this episode in the average house. But there is one reason why this episode is in the glory house, and that is Lola's subplot. Lola actually has a better reason for wanting to get into the yearbook because, unlike Lincoln and Clyde, she wants to have a good reputation. Her old yearbook photo is really stupid and she doesn't like it, so she tries to make a prettier one, otherwise her reputation is going to be ruined. And unlike the main story, the comedy with Lola's subplot is actually really funny. I like the part where she's trying to get her other sister to take a photo for her and they keep failing miserably and she just gets more and more frustrated. I thought these scenes were funny. Towards the end of the episode, both of the subplots end up colliding with each other. After Lola manages to get in her successful photo, she wants Lincoln to replace his yearbook photo with hers, so, like I said, her reputation isn't ruined. But this turns out to be a tough choice for Lincoln. What does he do? Should he keep his and Clyde's photo in the yearbook? Should he replace it with hers? In the end, Lincoln decides to swap his picture for Lola's, and I think this is really great character development. It shows that Lincoln cares about his family more than anything else, and if he has to see his sister cry in misery because her photo wasn't in the yearbook, he'll obviously be devastated. It's adorable seeing Lincoln helping his little sister out because it shows that he genuinely cares about her, even if their relationship isn't exactly very strong. So yes, Lola's subplot is easily the best thing about this episode, but the rest of it does hurt it. Like I said, I don't like the main story, I didn't think it was very entertaining, but the subplot is just so good that of course I had to put this episode in the glory house. It was a very tough choice, but in the end, it's good enough for me. Episode 40B, Room of the Feud. When the sisters are squabbling with each other, Lincoln shuffles them up in separate rooms. Before I get started, I should say, yes, when I saw the premise, I was really worried because this sounded very similar to Brawl in the Family. But thankfully, the actual episode more than makes up for it. In fact, this episode almost feels like an apology letter for Brawl in the Family. It has a similar concept where all the sisters are fighting with each other, but in this case, Lincoln actually tries to help them and it almost succeeds. And at least in this episode, it's not just fighting, it's just the sisters arguing with each other because they want each other to improve. That's a much better reason than what Brawl in the Family gave us. In fact, it's actually the best thing about this episode. I love the dialogue between the sisters, and all the different combinations that they have with each other is really creative. It's cool seeing some sisters that I didn't think would bond with each other actually get along pretty well, at least for the most part. In terms of which combinations I like the most, I like most of the ones in the second half of the episode rather than the first half, well, except for Lynn and Lenny. Personally, I thought the Lenny and Luann pairing was actually a lot better. However, despite the dialogue between the sisters, they actually kinda got on my nerves a little bit throughout the episode, and that's for one thing. They're kinda being selfish. If you saw my Season 1 review, you'll know I'm not a big fan of all the sisters being against Lincoln, and that's what happens in this episode. After the first pairings don't work out that well, all the sisters are mad at Lincoln. In fact, that comment that Lisa made about Lincoln's test only working because he was a boy just seemed a little bit sexist to me. But surprisingly, in this episode, it's not Lincoln who has to learn the lesson, it's the sisters that end up learning their lesson. In the second half of the episode, Lincoln now has to share a room with Lily because Lisa wants to have her own room. Lincoln ends out miserable by this, and the sisters begin to take notice, so they decide to move back to their original rooms just so Lincoln can get his old room back. At first I really liked this because it was cute seeing all the sisters actually giving a shit about Lincoln for once, and them being the ones that have to learn the lesson, but at the same time, did they all have to move back? Really, if you think about it, Lisa is the only sister who needed to move back into her own room. The other sisters didn't need to do that. They had no effect on Lincoln at all. But like I said, that's more of a small issue. I'm at least thankful that the sisters were willing to go back just so everyone could be happy and they would learn a lesson out of all this. The ending was really sweet, until it was cut off by a really stupid joke. Instead of this episode just ending with Lincoln thanking his sisters for what they did, it instead has to end with Lisa telling Lincoln that chemicals may still be in his room explodes, and as a result, he's now bald. Not only was this joke not funny, but they killed off a sincere ending. I really hate it when cartoons do this. They end off a really sincere moment with a really stupid joke. I understand that The Loud House is a comedy show, and that's one of the main aspects of the show itself. But that doesn't mean you have to kill off a sincere ending with a stupid joke. Like I said, not only is it not funny, but it just kills the moment. In the end, I have positives and negatives, but I think the positives outweigh the negatives enough that I think it can end up in the Glory House. This is certainly a way better version than Brawl in the Family. Episode 41A, Back Out There. When Clyde thinks Lincoln is suffering from post-breakup blues with Ronnie Ann, his friends take him out for the day. I don't really have too many things to say about Back Out There because it's just a very generic episode. On the one hand, I think it's neat that all of Lincoln's friends are there instead of just Clyde, but on the other hand, I don't find Lincoln's friends to be particularly interesting. Because there's nothing really unique about Lincoln's friends. Rusty's just the ladies' man, Liam is just the redneck kid, and Zach, well, I don't even know what Zach is. And of course, Clyde is just the yes man to Lincoln's problems. The actual episode's premise is really predictable. We already know that Lincoln doesn't actually miss Ronnie Ann, well, at least in the romantic way. He's just waiting for a package from her. I know at the end of the episode he says he does miss her, but don't get any ideas, Ronnie-kun fans. We all know he just misses her because she's just one of his best friends. I also thought it was kind of annoying how Ronnie Ann made Lincoln wait all those days for a package and it was just a pie to the face. I know it was just a silly prank and I didn't mind that kind of stuff when she did it in Shell Shocked, but to have Lincoln wait all those days just for a pie just wasn't really that interesting. In terms of comedy, well, I thought it was kind of amusing how Rusty's girl for Lincoln was actually an old lady. That was kind of amusing, but outside of that, there's not really too much to say about this episode. It's just boring and uninteresting. I'm just gonna put this episode in the average house. Like I said, there's not really much else for me to say. Episode 41B, Spell It Out. Tired of being walked over by her siblings, Lucy whips up a spell to teach them a lesson. First off, I have to ask, why is Lucy the one being walked over? In these kind of episodes, it's usually Lincoln the one that's being walked over, but okay, it's suddenly Lucy now. But honestly, that doesn't really matter, because I think the episode itself is fairly enjoyable. At least with this episode, I actually felt sorry for Lucy when she was trying to do her activities and her siblings were annoying her, but at least in this case, they weren't intentionally annoying her, they were just unintentionally annoying her. But even with that said, I have to admit, it was rather satisfying seeing the siblings get their consequences. Even though they weren't intentionally annoying Lucy, they were still annoying her and they didn't really show any remorse for it, so it was satisfying to see them get what they deserve. The comedy was pretty good too. Probably the funniest moment in my opinion was when Lynn was literally thrown off the team, and I mean literally thrown off the boat into the water. I'm not saying I like this because I'm not particularly fond of Lynn. I thought this moment was funny because it just came right the fuck out of nowhere. It's also really interesting how this episode doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue. Most of it belongs to Lucy because in the second half she ends up silencing her siblings even though in reality they just lost their voices because they attended Albert's game. But in that sense, it kind of makes the story a little bit predictable. We already know that Lucy's magic tricks isn't really going to work, and when that actual reveal came around, I wasn't entirely surprised. Also, I wish to know a little bit more about Great-Grandma Harriet because she looked exactly like Lucy when she was a kid. For a Lucy episode, it does a good job, but I don't like it as much as Back in Black because that episode was a lot more charming and I thought it was really funny and it was cute. This episode is just kinda predictable, but I don't think the episode was bad. I think it is a Glory House episode. I just wish it was a little less predictable and maybe a little bit more creative. Episode 42A, Fool's Paradise. The Loud family attempt to send Luann to a clown camp to avoid her April Fool's Day. So much like everyone else, I was not looking forward to this episode when it was announced. April Fool's Rules was a pretty stupid episode because even though it made Luann an antagonist and I understand her intentions, the episode itself was just really mean-spirited. Luann's pranks didn't really come across as surprising, there wasn't any suspense within the episode, and it's weird how Luann, the comedic person of the Loud House, wasn't even the funniest character in that episode. She was actually the most unlikable character in that scenario. But you want to know what's really funny? All the problems that I just mentioned with April Fool's rules don't apply with this episode. Yes, Luann is the antagonist, and she does prank her siblings a lot, but this episode actually plays it as more suspenseful, clever, and, I can't believe I'm saying this, funny. If there's one thing that Fool's Paradise gets done really well, it's how suspenseful it is. We actually don't know what the hell is going on here. Oh sure, we know Luann was the one that set up the whole prank thing, but the fact that Lynn Sr. was actually with her the entire time was actually rather shocking. But man, all the pranks that happened in this episode were just hilarious. Whether it was Luna falling into the jello and her quote of "Carry on, my wayward son," or the scene where Lucy is flat out sun-bleached and she is completely embarrassed by this. All the comedy in this episode is really creative and it doesn't come across as mean-spirited. With the exception of Lana and Lynn's pranks, the other siblings weren't really harmed by Luann's pranking. They were more annoyed or just kind of in a sticky situation. And even if you didn't like Luann in this episode, that's okay because she ends up getting her consequences at the end when Lincoln and Lynn Sr. decide to prank her back. Someone once argued with me that my reasons for not liking April Fool's rules seemed a little bit silly, especially since I really liked this episode. I have to argue with this, argument for two reasons. Number one, in the original episode, Luann is played as an antagonist, but she's not played as a fun antagonist. She's just portrayed as an antagonist who wants to see her siblings end up in misery. And yes, that does happen in this episode, but it's played at more of a creative side rather than a harsh tone kind of side. And second, in April Fool's rules, most of the episode was just Luann wanting to see Lincoln being embarrassed when Ronnie Ann comes over. And the pranks that Lincoln had to go through in that episode were really hurtful. They weren't creative or funny, they were just really painful, and you could clearly see the pain that Lincoln was going through. With this episode, that's a completely different story. The pranks are creative, the siblings aren't entirely hurt by them, it's just a funny, creative, and actually suspenseful episode. While April Fool's rules may have been in the garbage house, its sequel episode certainly ends up in the glory house. Episode 42B, Job Insecurity. When the Loud siblings think they're responsible for Lynn Sr. losing his IT job, they attempt to find him a new one. Before this episode came out, Chris Savino said that this episode was going to be a game changer, and after watching it, I can certainly understand what he was talking about. I don't know if anyone actually noticed this, but the whole fact that Lynn Sr. wanted to get a job as a chef, they've actually been foreshadowing this earlier in the season. There were several scenes throughout season 2 where Lynn Sr. is cooking, whether it was in 11 Loud's Leapin, The Whole Picture, and especially Fed Up. We could slowly but surely see Lynn Sr. improving with his cooking skills, and it all comes into place with this episode. I really applaud the writers for making Lynn Sr. wanting to get a dream job as a chef. He starts off as a dishwasher, but he slowly wants to get into the job of making food for people at a restaurant. This is a really clever way of developing Lynn Sr.'s character, because now we actually know why he was cooking in the first place, not just to improve on cooking for his family, but so it could also be a dream job, so he can get a job that he can actually enjoy doing. And with this episode, I actually appreciate the moral a lot more than when it was done in Cheater by the Dozen, because unlike that episode, stuff actually happens in between. There's a lot of things that happen in this episode, and the siblings actually learn a lesson, and you can clearly see them making up for their mistakes. Yes, in Cheater by the Dozen, you could see Lincoln and Clyde and presumably the other sisters cooking at the restaurant, but it didn't come across as genuine, it just came across as really silly and trying to be funny. With this episode, you can see how guilty the siblings are for what they did, and they try their best to make up for their dad for their mistakes. This episode portrays that moral a lot better than in Cheater by the Dozen, and at least we actually had some stuff that happened in between. And speaking of said stuff, let's talk about one of the best things about this episode, the comedy. I honestly can't think of a single joke in this episode where I wasn't laughing. Every single attempt at comedy in this episode is marvelous. There's the whole breakfast burrito thing where the siblings are either trying to defend their breakfast burrito from others, or how some siblings end up taking breakfast burritos from the others when they're not looking. There's Lola's whole angry rant on the phone, which is a callback to Get the Message when Lincoln was shouting at Lori on the phone. I'm glad that they brought back this gag, and it fits perfectly with Lola's character. This time her censoring was being blocked out by Lenny's hairdryer. And then there's the scenes with Mr. Grouse. These are the funniest scenes in the entire episode. Sure, they use that whole gag of, oh, he's an old guy, he doesn't know much about technology, but they play it in a really creative way. Every time the siblings are trying to teach him how to use the computer, he ends up doing it in the wrong way, and it's really funny. Like when they ask him to put out the trash on his computer, he literally puts all of his garbage on the computer. Or later, when an employee asks him to log off, he literally smashes the computer with a log. These gags are really creative and really funny. Of course, I'm going to put this episode in the glory house. There's just too many things good about it, and I can't think of one thing I didn't like. Lynn Sr.'s development is strong, the siblings work in the episode really well, the comedy is strong, the moral's really well done. Everything about this episode is just great. It makes it a perfect episode. I can certainly see why Chris Savino wasn't lying about the whole game changer thing, because this episode certainly is a game changer in just how awesome it is. Episode 43A, ARG, you for real? Lincoln and Clyde find out that ARG is coming to town and decide to go to the taping. ARG isn't particularly something I was crazy about. We've only seen this appear in maybe the first episode and possibly a few others. I wasn't particularly crazy about the idea, but I was still curious to see how it would turn out. And personally, I think this is one of Clyde's better episodes. He's not played as a typical yes man or funny sidekick to Lincoln, he's actually the main character in this episode. They give Clyde some real character depth, and I was really surprised by that, because when you watch the episode, you'll understand that Clyde is actually a bigger fan of ARG than Lincoln, so when Clyde finds out that the whole show is fake, he thinks everything is a myth now. Granted, it may not be the most realistic reaction when someone thinks something is fake, but hey, it's Clyde. I'd rather have him have some actual character development than his reaction being super realistic. The comedy was pretty well done as well. Of course, the funniest part of this episode would have to go to Clyde's dads. Their reactions when Clyde thinks things are a myth are hilarious. For example, when they tell Clyde he shouldn't go swimming after eating for at least 30 minutes, Clyde thinks it's a myth and he does it anyway, and their reactions is just hilarious. But I think my favorite part of this episode would have to go to the ghost catching sequence, when Lincoln and the host are trying to convince Clyde that the show is real, and the cherry on top when it turns out that they actually caught a ghost was pretty funny. However, probably my biggest issue with this episode was the way the message was handled. I know Clyde's reaction wasn't really that realistic, but I think it would have been a lot better if they did the message of, even if something's fake, you can still enjoy it. Like wrestling, for example. Sure, I may think it's fake, but I can still enjoy it because it's fun. If the episode went with that message, I think it would have been a lot better. But as it is, I still think it's a good episode. I wish it was a little bit stronger with its message, but for what it gets down, I think it does a good job. Episode 43B, Garage Band. Tired of her siblings' shenanigans, Lori moves into the garage to enjoy herself. At least for a little bit. Okay, let's first address the elephant in the room. This episode's premise is very similar to A Tale of Two Tables from Season 1. The way that these episodes play out is very similar. In that episode, Lincoln was tired of sitting at the kids' table, he wanted to sit at the adults' table, he enjoys it at first, but he doesn't like it, so he tries to get back to the kiddie table. This episode has a very similar setup. Lori's tired of her siblings, she wants to move into the garage, she enjoys it at first, but then she doesn't like it, so he tries to make her way back into the house. The similarities in this episode are very, very obvious, and as such, it makes the plot very predictable. But with that said, I actually liked the way that Lori was portrayed in this episode. I thought her ways of wanting to get back into the house was really cute, and I liked how they developed her as a character who's not quite ready to move out yet. She may think that she's old enough to be on her own, but she's not quite there yet, and she still appreciates being with her siblings. I thought they handled that message really well. There was also one joke in this episode that I really loved, and it was the one involving Mr. Grouse, where Lori wants Mr. Grouse to crash his lawnmower into the garage, and yet he ends up backing his lawnmower into his garage, and he ends up saying, "Can I still have your dad's lasagna?" I thought that was pretty funny. I also liked the way Lana was portrayed in this episode. Her whole reasonings for wanting to sleep with Laurie because she had a nightmare were really cute. I also find it odd that she sleeps with her boots on, since we've never actually seen her do this before. Unfortunately, everything else in this episode doesn't work for me. First off, they bring back the ball joke from Potty Mouth. Now, I didn't mind it in Potty Mouth because I think it served the story and they actually took advantage of it, but in this episode, it just doesn't seem very funny to me. I don't know why the writers keep doing this for season 2. Did they think it was funny the first time and wanted to do it with all the siblings? Jesus, I hope there isn't an episode where all of the siblings become bald. I also didn't like Lenny in this episode because just like in certain other episodes this season, she's played more of an idiot and less than an airhead, and there's one scene in particular where I absolutely hated the way she was portrayed. It's after Laurie moves into the garage and Lana comes into the room. She had another nightmare. At first they look like that Lenny's going to let Lana sleep with her, but when Lana actually tells Lenny the dream, Lenny suddenly thinks it's real. Like, what the heck? You can't suddenly have Lenny think the dream is real when a few seconds ago you can clearly see that she knew it was just a nightmare and it isn't real. I know they did this joke in The Simpsons, and generally in that episode I thought the joke was actually funny, but in The Simpsons, Homer's an idiot. There's a difference between someone being stupid and someone being an airhead. Someone being stupid is just when, they're making stupid decisions, but an airhead is someone who's not fully aware of a situation. Lenny's the airhead, Homer's the idiot. Lenny is not the Homer. She's a Lenny. She's supposed to be herself. But Lenny's not the only character I didn't like in this episode. I thought Lisa was really creepy in this episode, and not in a good way. What I mean is, this isn't the kind of creepy that we thought was funny in episodes like Lock and Loud and Study Muffin. I mean legitimately creepy. She wants to take out Lincoln's appendix, and before she took out one of his kidneys. This isn't the funny kind of creepy, this is just really disturbing creepy. Luann was also kind of annoying in this episode, because she keeps constantly saying puns to Laurie when she's just trying to have a conversation with Bobby. I know Luann is supposed to be annoying, but it also has to be in a way where it's not annoying the audience. Also, there's one particular scene where she threatens Lincoln to be on her side, and if he doesn't, she's gonna get Mr. Coconuts to hit him with a baseball bat. Like, what the fuck? And speaking of said scene, let's also talk about Luna, because out of all the characters in this episode, aside from Lenny, Luna is another example where I just hated her. Not only is she once again barely used in this episode, but there's one scene where she acts totally out of character. It's the scene I was talking about earlier, where she's having an argument with Luann, and there's one point where she straight up threatens to beat up Lincoln unless he agrees with her. And you can't make the argument, oh, you're just angry about this because she was threatening to beat up Lincoln. No, if she did this to anyone, I would still be annoyed, because this is out of character for Luna. She's meant to be chilled back, relaxed, normally a very nice person. She's not a bully. Just because Laurie's moved out doesn't mean you have to turn Luna into the bully. I don't mind it when Luna's angry unless it's for a good reason, like in house music, but when it's over something so small, it's just really annoying and it's out of character for Luna. So yes, there are some positives and some negatives. The positives do maintain throughout the episode, but there's a lot of negatives. So with that said, I think I'm gonna put this episode in the average house. It's not a bad episode, but it is on the pretty low end of average. Episode 44A, Change of Heart. When Clyde tries to act normal in front of Laurie, he enlists help from Lenny. So this episode was advertised as a big game changer, where Clyde acts like he's finally wanting to get over his crush of Laurie, and we all know how much people hate that running gag, where Clyde, every time he sees Laurie, either acts like a robot, faints, or nosebleeds. Everyone I know has hated this gag, and so when this episode was first advertised, we were really excited because we thought Clyde was finally gonna stop with this whole creepy crush thing. But does the episode actually do that? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. First off, I should say I really liked the way Lenny was portrayed in this episode. She's still ditzy, she's still a bit of an airhead. In this episode, her advice is actually really helpful. Sure, she's ditzy, but she's still very helpful, and I like that her advice actually does help Clyde with his situation. And because of Lenny's helpful tips, it also builds a good friendship between Lenny and Clyde. I'm very thankful that the episode didn't go into the route where Clyde suddenly supposedly has a crush on Lenny. If that had happened, this episode would have been a lot worse. Mr. Grouse is also in this episode, and like in the previous ones, he has some amusing gags, but they're not quite as funny as his scenes in Garage Band or Job Insecurity. So yes, there's things I like about this episode. I like Lenny's portrayal, I like the tips that she gives, I like the friendship between Lenny and Clyde. What's wrong with this episode? I can give you that problem in one word. Laurie. My God, did I hate Laurie in this episode. People say that she was the best part about this episode. I don't really buy it. Laurie was so unlikable and so selfish in this episode. Sure, you can say she quote-unquote learns a lesson, but I feel like the only lesson she learns in this episode is that she should occasionally say thank you from time to time whenever Clyde gets her something. That's one of the things I really didn't like about this episode, where at the beginning of the episode, Laurie wants Clyde to get over his crush of her because, you know, it's creepy and it's disturbing and all that, and she acts really selfish about this, by the way, but then by the end of the episode, she suddenly wants Clyde back. You've all seen this scenario, haven't you? Where the girl is tired of the loser gets over the girl suddenly wants the loser back, and so she tries to earn him back, and it's basically back to square one. I couldn't stand Laurie in this episode because her reasoning for wanting Clyde back is so monumentally selfish. Why, you ask? Because she only wants Clyde back because he got her a bunch of gifts and he basically supported her. Yup, that pretty much means that she wanted his nosebleed, she wanted his passing out, she wanted his creepy crush back just so he can get her a bunch of gifts and that she can say thank you from time to time. And here's the reason why I really hate this. It's because Laurie already has a fucking boyfriend who already supports her and gives her a bunch of gifts. But apparently, that's not enough for Laurie, because now she wants the same thing with Clyde. In fact, it's so bad that Laurie pretty much goes insane up to the point where she tries to dress up like Lenny. I don't feel bad for you, Laurie. I'm annoyed at you, because you brought this upon yourself. Clyde's trying to get over his creepy crush of you, and you can even tell at the beginning that he wants to get over it, he's sick of it, and the fact that you pretty much got him back to the way he was shows that you only did this for an incredibly selfish reason, you asshole. Oh, did I mention that Clyde actually goes back to the way he was? Yup! After all of this, after all of Lenny's attempts to help Clyde act normal around Laurie, guess what? It doesn't happen. At the end of the episode, Clyde's finally ready to have a normal conversation with Laurie, but when she starts talking to him, he passes out, and when he wakes up, he's back to the way he was before, which means this whole episode was completely pointless! I cannot believe this. They hyped this whole episode up for nothing. And the ending pretty much unmasked Laurie as a character. It made her look like an unhealthy person who only wants to keep herself happy and doesn't give a shit about other people. But at the same time, it also makes Clyde look unhealthy because he still hasn't gotten over his crush of Laurie. So with all that said, I am putting this episode in the garbage house. I don't care if there's people who like this episode, I really disliked it. I hated how Laurie was portrayed and how unhealthy and selfish she is. I hate that we pretty much got nothing new out of this episode and nothing was learned at all. This is one of the most pointless episodes of the season, and thanks to it, it's now made me hate Laurie a lot more. Thanks a lot, you stupid episode. Episode 44B, Health Kicked. Worried that their parents are hurting their health from not being active, the children encourage them to exercise. I don't really have too much to say about Health Kicked because, in my opinion, I think it's just a decent episode at best. My favorite part about this episode would probably have to be all the attempts that the siblings try to do to help their parents exercise, whether it's Lisa's whole meditation thing, which was funny thanks to Lynn Sr.'s quotes, or Luna's part where Lynn Sr. smashes the guitar and the comment she makes afterwards was funny. But strangely enough, the funniest part in my opinion was when Lana was wrestling with Rita. I don't know why it seemed so funny to me. Maybe it's the fact that Lana's flat out wrestling her own mother. I don't know, there was just something really funny about it. The other good jokes aren't really that funny, but they're amusing enough. I like that part where Lana was drinking the onion water and eating the grubs and she was absolutely okay with it. I like that little ice cream truck gag. It was alright, but it wasn't anything I was crazy about. I also thought it was somewhat funny how all the siblings were all piled together when they were exhausted from all the exercising. I don't know why, I just thought it was kind of funny how they were just all piled together and they weren't really all all spread out. I just thought something was weirdly funny about that. The message of this episode was okay as well, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Health Kicked. I'm not gonna go back and rewatch this episode a bunch of times, but I think it's a decent episode that earns its spot in the Glory House. Episode 45A, Future Tense. When Rita and Lynn Sr. meet an impressive family, they worry their kids aren't doing enough to ensure successful futures. So when I first heard about this episode, I thought it was going to be some sort of foreshadowing episode where they're going to foreshadow what's going to happen with the siblings in the future, but instead it's just an episode where the siblings are going off to random schools and doing different things, and honestly, this episode kind of fails with its execution. Why I say this is because the episode plays out exactly how I think it's going to happen. Thanks to this premise, I could predict what was going to happen in this episode. As soon as the parents meet this successful family, they're going to think their children aren't successful enough, so they try to make them do it, and then later they realize, oh, you should take a break. But then as soon as they see the family again, they decide to force the kids back into doing things, and honestly, that's all that happens throughout this episode. Just the parents deciding what their children should do and what they shouldn't do, and the story's just not that interesting. And to add on top of that, like I said, it just feels sloppy. It's just one gag repeated all throughout. Is that really a good idea for a story? And what makes it worse is that whole successful family only seemed to be in the episode as plot devices and not actual characters. Also, there was just something about that successful family that just made me feel uncomfortable. Maybe it was their robotic movement, or maybe it's how they've always got a constant grin on their face. I don't know, just something about this family seemed a little bit uncomfortable for me. In terms of positives, there's a few jokes I like. Probably the funniest joke in this episode was the whole dropping off montage when the parents are dropping the children off at several schools and the comments they make. That was kind of funny. I also found it amusing how all of the siblings were asleep during an opera except for Lisa. It was a nice callback to For Bros About to Rock. In the end, this episode is going into the ARGGH house, which is a shame because I think with a story like this, it could have been a lot better, but as is, it's sloppy and it's not really that funny. Episode 45B, Lynn-er Takes All. Tired of Lynn's poor sportsmanship during board games, the siblings decide to team up so they can take her down and teach her a lesson. Oh boy, when I first heard about this episode, I wasn't really looking forward to it. I mean, no such luck kinda destroyed Lynn's character for me. You all remember how angry I was at her during the review. But at the same time, I was also slightly interested in this episode because of the whole poor sportsmanship thing. Maybe Lynn will finally learn to stop being such a jackass to her siblings. And by default, this is probably Lynn's best episode, but as I said, it's by default, because personally, I still don't think this episode is that great. There are a few things I like. The highlight for me would have to be Luann's gloat puns. She's constantly making these gloating puns because every time Lynn wins a game, she's constantly gloating in front of her siblings, and the fact that Luann constantly makes puns about it kinda eases the moment for me. They were amusing. I also thought it was funny how towards the end of the episode, when the siblings decided to throw the game, Lenny thought they were literally going to throw the game out the window, and that's exactly what she does. But how exactly is Lynn herself, you may be wondering? Well, in my opinion, this episode doesn't really redeem her character for me, because throughout the episode, Lynn is just really annoying. And I get that that was the intention of the episode, to make Lynn annoying, but you also have to make sure that it only annoys the sibling and not actually annoying the audience as well. All throughout this episode, Lynn is constantly being very competitive. She's always making these stupid comments whenever she wins in a game, and when she's so close to losing, she throws a tantrum and tries so desperately to win. There's one scene in this episode where they're all playing this game from Lana, and Lynn gets so angry that she has to go outside, pretty much exercise, throw a trash can, and shout because she's so desperate to win. And then when Lynn actually loses a game, she doesn't take it all that well, and now she's suddenly being competitive with everything, whether it's drinking milk, racing upstairs, or brushing her teeth. Again, I understand that this was the intention of the episode, to make Lynn really annoying, but like I said, it's annoying the audience as well. I just thought Lynn was very annoying in this episode, because all throughout, she is constantly being a dick to her siblings, and she doesn't take it all that well. She's making these stupid comments. Like I said earlier, all I was asking to myself is this really what fans love about her? But thankfully, there is one thing about this episode that does redeem it for me, and that's the ending, sort of. After all the siblings decide to actually let Lynn win a game, They all pretty much tell Lynn that, oh, you're a bad sport and we're so sick of your competing. And in a rare case, Lynn actually apologizes for her behavior, and unlike a certain other episode, it isn't cut off by a stupid joke. Well, Lynn doesn't entirely learn her lesson. I mean, sure, they play the next game and she's not all that competitive afterwards, but then she goes outside and that's when she starts celebrating. At least it isn't annoying the siblings, but still, it doesn't really show that Lynn entirely learned her lesson. I guess I shouldn't be too shocked because, hey, it's Lynn. She's always being competitive and she always thinks she's number one. Well, she's certainly not number one in my book. I do think this is Lynn's best episode, but I still don't think it's that good. Again, this is probably Lynn's best episode, but I'm only saying that by default. There are positives, but it's not really enough to save Lynn's annoying behavior. But you probably thought I was going to put this in the garbage house. No, I'm just going to put it in the average house, because like I said, there are positives, and they do kind of help the episode, but if Lynn's behavior was just toned down a little bit, maybe I could have liked it a lot more. As is, it's Lynn's best episode, but man, is she still annoying as shit. Episode 46A, Yes Man. When the sisters desperately need money, Lincoln teaches them how to be convincing. When I first heard about this episode, I of course grew really worried. With that kind of premise, I thought, oh no, they're gonna try and do something, and then it ends up fucking things up, and so the sisters are gonna be mad at Lincoln. I thought it was gonna be one of those episodes. But thankfully, the actual episode itself was not exactly what I thought it would be. Instead, this episode almost feels similar to Serial Offender, in that all the sisters want something, so Lincoln has to do it for them, and in the end, Lincoln can't get what he wants, so the sisters feel bad and they have to make it up to him. That's kind of the biggest problem that I have with the episode. The execution feels very similar to Serial Offender. If you watch both of these episodes back to back, you can almost spot the similarities. But unlike Serial Offender, where the sisters were really annoying, in this episode, I actually wasn't as annoyed with the sisters as I was in that episode. Well, actually, there's one thing that kind of bothers me about the sisters' motivations to earn money from their parents. Some of them already have jobs, don't they? I mean, Lori works at Gus's Games and Grub, Luann has her own funny business, and I'm sure Luna does gigs for money as well. I don't really find it believable to have all of the sisters ask Lincoln to help them get money from their parents, especially considering some of them have jobs. I wouldn't mind it so much if they established that they didn't have jobs anymore, but I think it's quite clear that they still do, especially in Luann's case. But surprisingly, there's a lot of things I really like about this episode. The thing I liked the most would probably have to be the chemistry built between Lincoln and Luna. Luna is the first sister that Lincoln asks for help, and throughout the episode, you can see a cute little interaction between the two. I thought it was adorable seeing Luna become so ecstatic when Lincoln agreed that he was going to help her, and I loved how Luna sings to Lincoln while also hugging him, thanking him for helping her later on was also really adorable. Some people have told me that I'm really gonna hate the scene where Luna says no to Lincoln wanting to use her guitar, but she was only kidding. She ends up letting him use it anyway, so I don't really see what the issue is. If there's one thing I thought could have made their chemistry a lot better, I wish they had a scene where it had all the siblings arguing about who started this whole mess, and Luna ends up being the one who started it. Thus, it would make her motivation to help Lincoln get better a lot more believable and much more strong with their chemistry. It doesn't exactly hurt the episode, but I think it would have been nice to actually see it. And of course, I love the song at the end. I thought it was adorable seeing the sisters all dressing up as Smooch members just to cheer up Lincoln because he couldn't go to the Smooch concert. I thought that was really cute, and it even helped that they actually managed to get the members of Smooch to sing the song with them. I thought the ending was really sweet, until it was cut off by a stupid joke involving Lisa's whole spider thing. Ugh, they already did this issue with Rumor the Feud. Why are they doing it now? Especially since the situation is so much more sincere. Like I said, I absolutely hate it when sincere moments are cut off by stupid jokes. It doesn't help the situation or the mood at all. Ugh, forgive me for my little rant there. So aside from a few issues here and there, I really enjoyed Yes Man, and I'm very happy about that because, as I said before, I was really nervous about it. Sure, the similarities to Serial Offender are there. I wish some elements were explored a little bit more, and of course that fucking joke at the end really annoyed me, but there's a lot of positives here. Just enough to have this episode earn a spot in the Glory House. It may seem similar, but hey, I'd rather watch this than see a bunch of sisters being annoying at a shopping center. Episode 46B, Friend or Fox? Fox? Folks? I don't really know how to pronounce that. Anyway, in this episode, when Lisa's report card reveals that she has failed social skills, she must make a friend in order to bring up her grade. Lisa episodes have never been particularly interesting to me, and that's partly because I don't really see Lisa as a very compelling or interesting character. But surprisingly, I actually thought Lisa was really well used in this episode, and it helped make this episode a really enjoyable one. There's a lot of people I know who really like this episode, but there's a different view I have on it that a friend of mine also agreed on. It's the fact that this episode feels like an allegory for living on the autism spectrum. I don't really know if the episode was intending to be that, but regardless, I still really love this episode. I think the main reason why I view this episode as what it's like to have autism is because of how it portrays Lisa. She's talented in all the areas at school except for social skills because she gets an F, not being able to make one friend. She views her personal time and her academics as being more important than having friends, and she initially sees it as something just to get herself an A. It's even at that point where she approaches forming a friendship with someone as if it's some kind of scientific experiment. With all this, it actually makes Lisa a very relatable character that people on the autism spectrum can easily relate to. And then there's Darcy Hummendaler, the girl that Lisa chooses to form a friendship with. My god, I love Darcy. She's a great contrast to Lisa. She may seem like your typical 4-year-old stereotype, but she's just so sweet. She's a very kind and energetic and bubbly little girl who acts different compared to Lisa. And that's one of the episode's best elements, the chemistry between Lisa and Darcy. The way they play off each other is just adorable. Lisa sees Darcy as the test subject in her experiment until she realizes her mistake, and Darcy thinks Lisa is just playing scientist and finds her use of big scientific words funny. There's this one scene I particularly thought was really funny. It's the scene where Lisa's trying to read from this study guide, and Darcy's struggling to read simple sentence from a picture book. I thought that was really funny. If I had to point out a problem with this episode, it's that the story is a little bit predictable, but as I said, I can totally buy it because of what it's aiming for. And I'm not kidding, this episode actually pulled at my heartstrings. That scene where Darcy's crying after Lisa declares their friendship over was so heartbreaking. It's a very powerful moment, and when the ending comes around, when Lisa thinks that friendship is better than what she's doing and Lisa and Darcy become friends again, it makes it all the more satisfying. So yes, this episode is somewhat predictable, but I can totally brush it off. I love this episode a lot, and of course I'm going to put it in the glory house. This is certainly the best episode that Lisa's ever had, and I really hope that Season 3 continues the chemistry between Lisa and Darcy. I would love to see more episodes with these two again. Episode 47A, No Laughing Matter. When Luann overhears her siblings complaining about her comedy, she decides to give it up. Now, before I saw this episode, I will say that I've always thought of Luann as one of my favorite characters on the show. She comes across as a very adorable girl who had cheesy puns, but there was a certain sense of self-awareness to her character where she knew her jokes weren't great, but she's going to give her audience all that she's got in hopes that her jokes will land in the end. Unfortunately, this episode completely killed that self-awareness and instead showcased what Luann truly is, a clueless idiot who can't take criticism and refuses to see what makes her comedy annoying to others. When she hears her siblings complaining about her comedy, Luann's only solution is just to give up entirely, even though she's been doing comedies for years, probably since she was a kid, and all of a sudden now Luann is hearing people criticize her work? You know what? I honestly can't blame the siblings, because at the beginning of the episode, Luann's just being a dick to everyone, not making puns, just pranking them, like she did in April Fool's Rules. So when the siblings truthfully admitted why it was annoying to them, she just decides to give it up, even though, like I said before, she's probably been doing this as a kid, and all of a sudden now she hears her siblings complaining about her comedy. Was all those groans and annoyances not enough for Luann? Like I said earlier, there was always a self-awareness with Luann's character. She didn't care that people didn't like her jokes. She didn't care that her jokes weren't that great. She's just gonna give her audience the best that she's got. But with this episode, she suddenly hears her siblings complaining about her, and then she decides to give it up. This just destroys Luann's character. Now I don't see her as a self-aware person, I just see her as an idiot who refuses to actually improve on herself. Because of all this, it just gives me little to no reason to feel sorry about Luann. I'm more bewildered that Luann would be this upset about this. You know what would have made this episode a lot better? If Luann tried to improve on her comedy. Like, she hears her siblings complaining about her comedy. At first she gives it up, but then she realizes that the siblings may actually make a point, so she tries to improve on her comedy. That's the kind of thing I would expect Luann to do, because I know she wouldn't give up comedy this easily. That's the kind of thing I expect Luann to do, because I know she wouldn't easily give up comedy because people were complaining about it. She's self-aware of that fact, but she keeps doing it. And even if she did realize that people didn't like her comedy, I know she'd try to improve on it. But instead, this episode wants to make the siblings look like the bad guys because they were the ones that criticized Luann's comedy. I honestly think that's really stupid, because it just seems like now it's an episode about hating the critics, which is a plotline that hardly works for any series, and it just makes the writers come across as more insecure than they should be. They were truthfully admitting their criticisms. Luann's clearly the one that needs to improve on herself. I also really hate the message behind this episode, is that if you criticize someone, then clearly you're the bad guy. Oh, so me hating on Brawl and the family and no such luck was a bad thing? Is that what this episode's trying to tell me? Well, if it is, then it's stupid at trying to explain it. If they had gone with that message of trying to improve on yourself if you're being criticized, that's a lot better, because I myself have been through that. Personally, I don't see critics as the bad guys. They're just critics. They're giving out their honest opinion. And this episode thinks it's a stupid idea because, oh look, Luann's feeling sad. You're supposed to feel sorry for her. Like I said, I don't feel sorry for Luann because she doesn't try to improve on her comedy. She refuses to take criticism. I hate people that do that. People that don't take constructive criticism and just give up because they don't know what to do with themselves. Luann's been doing this since she was a kid. How come now she decides to give up instead of trying to improve on herself? That's stupid character development. And when we actually see Luann being her normal self, oh my god, is she boring. She just says the most basic stuff that every normal human being would be. If Luann was actually like this throughout the whole show, she'd probably be my least favorite character. Those are not the only problems that I have with this episode. There's a lot of other problems as well. I really don't like the scene when the siblings are all trying to make Luann do something funny. It just drags on a little bit, and it happens a lot throughout the episode. I didn't think it was that funny. But I think the most unfunny moment in this episode would have to be the scene when Lincoln's reading jokes out of Luann's book. I understand that they were trying to make this bad because Lincoln is clearly struggling with this, but it comes across as so cringeworthy. I don't think it's funny that Lincoln's screwing up. I think it's really stupid. And then afterwards, Luann suddenly returns to her normal comedic self. Yep, she didn't really learn anything in this episode. The only thing she really learned is that she should tone down her comedy, since that was the real issue to begin with. But just like Lynn-er Takes All, it seems like Luann didn't really learn a lesson from this, because in future episodes, she's still the same person that she was. In terms of positives, there's not really too much. I like that whole joke where Lisa was telling the siblings about traveling back in time and how it could potentially swap their faces with butts. I like that little scene when Lenny was hugging Luann. That was cute. But aside from those positives, this episode is really stupid. I'm honestly really annoyed with this episode, because being a critic, I absolutely hate the kind of people that do this when they refuse to take constructive criticism. This episode says that judging things badly is a stupid idea. I don't care. This episode's going in the garbage house. Episode 47B, No Spoilers. Knowing Lenny's history of spoiling surprises, the children decide to not tell her about their mother's upcoming party. Remember when I said in my Season 1 video that Driving Miss Hazy is Lenny's best episode? I think I just found the episode to take that spot, this episode. Before this episode came out, I was both really excited and nervous going into this segment. Sure, we were getting another Lenny episode, but we're also dealing with the Season 2 Lenny, who has gone from being one of my favorite sisters to souring me throughout the season. Lenny is easily the best thing about this episode. She's written here just the way she should be written. She's ditzy, but it's not taken to an extreme where she comes off as a brainless idiot, and in that sense it leads to a lot of funny jokes. One of my favorite jokes from Lenny is when she's trying to find a birthday card, and when she opens it, her phone rings and she thinks that's the song from the card. I thought that was really funny. But probably the thing I like the most about Lenny here is that her kind heart is also shown, as well as her passion for fashion tension, which has been sorely missing throughout this season. As for other attempts at comedy that isn't from Lenny, it's also really funny as well. Each of the siblings get their own chance to shine, and thankfully no one feels underused. Every single attempt at comedy in this episode was really funny. I don't really have too much to say about no spoilers, I just loved this episode throughout. I love the way Lenny was written, I love her sweet heart, I love the comedy, I love the sweet tone of this episode, I love how creative it is, I love how each sibling gets their own chance to shine. I just love this episode. I'm gonna put this one in the glory house. As I said, it's certainly Lenny's best episode by far. Episode 48A, Legends. Lincoln and Lynn Sr. go on Legends of the Hidden Temple and cannot wait for a whole day of father and son bonding. I think this is actually the first episode of the Loud House to have a crossover with another show, but does it work? For the most part, yes, but there's a few problems that I have with it. But first I should say that the bonding between Lincoln and Lynn Sr. is certainly the best thing about this episode. The way that the two work off each other and how they're arguing and they realize their mistakes is really great to see. I knew one of these days we would get a father-son episode in the Loud House. I'll also say that I've never seen Legends of the Hidden Temple, but I will safely say that this is my first time being exposed to it, and I think it looks really cool. I love all the different ancient aspects, I like all the different objects being seen and the different tasks that they have to do with each game. I thought it was a really creative looking show. Maybe I should check it out at some point. So yes, this episode has a good premise, it's got some good bonding, and it's got a pretty nice looking show. All that would put this episode in the glory house, but there are a few problems that I have with it. Number one, I really didn't like the antagonists of this episode. There are these two other competitors who are constantly being bullies to Lincoln and Lynn Sr., and it doesn't really look like that they're the kind of bullies that are having fun with what they're doing. They just seem like the stereotypical bully characters who act like they're better than the other characters, and they're trying their hardest to beat them, and it seems like that what they're doing is pathetically easy. Yeah, this is the kind of bully I expect from an Adam Sandler movie. And not once did I ever smile or laugh whenever these bullies were on screen. I thought they were easily the worst thing about this episode. And second, I really didn't like the ending. Not the fact that they're in their underwear. I actually thought it was kind of funny how the audience is applauding for them because of their bond. I thought that was kind of cute. But then that's cut off by a really stupid joke involving the police, and yeah, this has been happening quite a few times throughout the season. I don't know why it keeps happening. But those are really my only problems with the episode. I thought it was really good. I liked the bonding, I liked the show's aspect, and I thought there were a few amusing jokes. A decent episode, but I just wish the bullies were more interesting. Episode 48B, Mall of Duty. Lincoln wants to go to the mall, but has to watch his younger sisters, so he decides to take them with him. Based off the plot, I thought this was going to be another serial offender, but surprisingly, the sisters actually ended up being the best part about this episode. I thought all the different activities that the siblings were doing throughout the episode when they get lost was really cute. Of course, the highlight for me would have to be when Lana was looking after the baby ducklings. I thought that was just natural for her character, and of course, it was really adorable. There's also some action in this episode too. Lincoln has to team up with Scoots in order to get Lily back because the train is running through the mall. So yes, this episode is exciting, and the sisters are the best part about this episode. And there's certainly a lot of jokes here that I do like, and the moral's kind of been used before in other episodes, but for this kind of plot, I think it works fine enough. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of positives with this episode, and I think I will put it in the glory house. However, there's just one thing that kind of bothers me about this episode. Lincoln wants to get his book signed by this guy who is always in the wilderness and he's really popular about it. This kind of goes against the message that Lincoln learned in Roughing It. Why is Lincoln suddenly into the wilderness show again when in Roughing It showed that he wasn't really a big fan of the wilderness? I know, it's kind of a small issue, but that kind of goes against what Lincoln learned in that episode. Episode 49A, Read Aloud. The Loud family engages in a reading challenge at the library, but Lola refuses to participate. So far, Lola's had a pretty good track record when it comes to this season. Sure, she's had a few dud episodes like Sound of Silence, but she's had a lot of great episodes this season, especially with patching things up. And I can safely say that this episode does continue that good track record with her. My biggest issue with this segment comes within the first 2/3, where the story is really predictable and really bland. While I did buy into the reason why the family wanted to read a lot of books, as it was for a contest, the scenes in the first half aren't that interesting or amusing. There's one sequence where all the siblings try to convince Lola to read, and this scene feels like a rehash of the siblings trying to get Luann to crack a joke during that one sequence in No Laughing Matter. Not only is the scene boring, but it's lazy for the writer of this episode to reuse sequence structures used in previous episodes, especially one that just came out before this one. Another issue I have with this episode is that it's honestly not that funny. We get a line from Lucy about how they should chain Lola up in the attic and disguise Lana as Lola, which could have been a darkly funny moment, except Rita ends up ruining the joke by actually agreeing to go along with Lucy's sick plan. In my opinion, the only character who provides the best comedy is Lisa. I thought it was pretty funny how she was trying to disguise herself as a cowboy when visiting the library due to her overdue library books, which just seems like a very Lisa thing for her to do. Also, some of the characters feel really underused, most notably Lenny, Luna, and Lynn. Now with Lynn's case, I don't really care, especially since this came after No Such Luck. I honestly think Carla, the writer behind this episode, should just stay away from writing Lynn. And Lenny isn't written all that bad, but Luna only gets 3 lines and she doesn't really stand out that well. With how much this has been happening throughout this season, I get the impression that Carla actually hates Luna as a character and wants to give her as little screen time as possible, since she also did this with Luna in No Such Luck and Change of Heart. So I'm pointing out a bunch of problems here. Why would I call this a good episode? Well, that's when the second half comes in, because this is when the episode actually starts to shine. After Lola fails the quiz for her book, Lincoln has a plan to have one-on-one with her and force her to read. Then Lincoln learns why Lola doesn't read. It's because she finds reading too hard and gives up on it. I really like how the episode was exploring Lola possibly having dyslexic, and Lincoln decides to help her read the book not just for the contest, but also because he wants to help her overcome this issue. This was one of the best moments of season 2. Lincoln was being such a great big brother to Lola, helping her read, and the hug they exchange put a big smile on my face. This is made even better when the family is mad at Lincoln for ruining their chances of winning the contest. At first I got worried because I thought, oh no, this is gonna turn into another Sleuth or Consequences, but then Lola ends up standing up for Lincoln and admits that it was all her fault, so the family forgives them and realize they were being too harsh. So while this isn't my favorite Lola episode, I still really enjoy it, and I'm gonna put it in the glory house. I just hope the Loud House continues with the streak of giving Lola some great episodes. Episode 49B, Not Allowed. When Lincoln finds his birth story is blank, he thinks his parents are hiding something from him. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. We all know why this episode exists. Long before this episode came out, a lot of people were making theories that Lincoln was actually adopted, and this was one of the most popular theories of all time. Personally, I never liked this theory. I never believed that Lincoln was actually adopted. If I believed anybody was adopted, it was actually gonna be Luna. So I'm very thankful that this episode actually confirms that Lincoln is never adopted, but did they have to make a crappy episode to go along with it? Yeah, this is a
garbage house episode.
While I am glad that this episode confirms that Lincoln isn't adopted, the actual birth story itself is really stupid. What happens is that the parents' van breaks down on their way to the hospital, so they're picked up by the President of the United States, and the First Lady delivers Lincoln. I thought this birth story was really stupid. It sounds like something that came straight out of a fan fiction, and it only exists so the parents wouldn't want to explain to Lincoln why he was born at the beginning of the episode. Why would the President of the United States randomly show the fuck up out of nowhere and want to deliver Lincoln? Do the writers seriously not understand how private the president likes to be? He's always in these private vehicles trying to stay out of the public crowd so they're not noticed. It's only during those rallies where they actually decide to make speeches. I find it really unrealistic that the president would suddenly show up out of nowhere and help the parents deliver baby Lincoln. They just want to go with a really over-the-top reason that just doesn't feel realistic enough. But okay, the birth story's pretty shit. How's the rest of the episode? It's really stupid. Why on earth is this a Lincoln McCloud episode? This is exploring Lincoln's birth story. Why does it need to be a Lincoln McCloud episode? It has no serving to the plot, and it has no reason to be in this episode. Personally, I feel like the only reason it's here is because they once again want to have these over-the-top and silly ways of Lincoln and Clyde trying to figure out this answer, and one of them is without any doubt one of the stupidest gags in the whole show, the field test gag. My God, do I hate this gag. Every time Lincoln asks one of his sisters how he was born, they explain it to him, but then he feels some details are missing, or maybe he comes from somewhere else, so he and Clyde try to do a field test gag to see if they were correct. They repeat this gag like 5 times throughout the episode, and it's not funny. You can't just repeat the same joke over and over again, especially if it didn't work the first time. And speaking of which, this is also one of the unfunniest episodes of the entire show. Despite the abysmal field test gag, every other attempt at comedy is awful. We get this one scene where Lincoln is trying to find a different family to see which one he comes from, and Clyde is constantly sweating in his socks. I thought that joke was really stupid, but the icing on the cake was this joke that almost made me vomit, where Lincoln says, "This plot hole has more holes than my underwear." Seriously, that joke almost made me barf. Like I said, I'm really annoyed that this is a Lincoln McCloud episode, because the writers only put it there so they can have these over-the-top ways of Lincoln and Clyde trying to figure out where Lincoln actually came from. Would it really hurt the writers if they for once focused on a story that was really heartwarming? If this episode had just been the parents simply explaining to Lincoln where he came from and how he was born, and maybe they could explain why the photos aren't in his book, like maybe they belong to his 4 oldest sisters because they were a big part of his life and he was a big part of their lives. How much better would that have been? In fact, I did an entire rewrite focusing on this premise. The link is in the description, be sure to go check it out. I hope you really enjoy it, and I hope you think it's a lot better than this stupid, unfunny episode. Play special number 3, episode 53. The Loud siblings prepare to have a great Halloween until 2 bullies ambush the royal woods. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking like that. So now we're here with the 3rd and final special of season 2. So far, the specials in this season have had a pretty good track record of being really great episodes, and they serve really well to the story. So let's see if this episode does the same thing. I was really excited to check out this episode because a lot of people really loved it, and oh boy, let's just say that I'm not gonna make a lot of friends when I talk about this episode. I'm just gonna say it. Next to Change of Heart and No Laughing Matter, this is one of the most disappointing episodes of the season, and it really hurts considering that this is a half-hour episode. Now, normally, I really like Halloween episodes. Gravity Falls did this with Summerween, and Regular Show has done this almost every year with their Terror Tales at the Park specials, which are all fantastic. The reason for this is because Halloween specials give the writers time to get weird and creative with the stories that they can tell for the holiday. Unfortunately, Tricked just plays it too safe. But before I get into why I don't really like this episode, I figure I should probably start off with the positives. First off, I really enjoyed the climax. It was easily the best part about the episode. I enjoyed how the siblings were used during the musical montage, and the song itself is great as well. The campy surf rock instrumental and goofy lyrics feels like a nice throwback to the era of music from the 1960s, even feeling reminiscent of Scooby-Doo. Not to mention Nika Futterman sounds like she's having a blast performing the song, with her lower range providing some menace and the evil laugh sounding just great with the overall vibe. I also really liked Lucy in this episode. She has this funny running gag of her being really excited when she wasn't really smiling, and her playing more of a major role for a Halloween episode fits perfect with her character. It's just a shame that her costume is easily the worst one out of all of them. On the topic of costumes, to me, Luna and Luann had the best costumes out of all the siblings. Plus, I thought the idea of Lana and Lola having 3 costumes in one just to score more candy is a cute idea. Not to mention, I also thought it was absolutely adorable how Lisa was dressed as a kangaroo and Lily was her baby kangaroo. There was also that running gag of Lynn Sr. being super scared of Halloween, which I thought was an amusing joke. Unfortunately, this is an episode where almost everything surrounding Lincoln and Clyde was far more interesting than their story, and that's not a good sign since that's the main plot that we follow. I found Lincoln and Clyde's story utterly boring and bland, and I have no idea why we keep getting episodes focused on these two when they're not that funny or interesting as a duo. I only enjoy those Lincoln McCloud episodes when there's actually development with their character, like with Intern for the Worse or Argue for Real, but instead, this episode does all the problems that I can't stand with a Lincoln McCloud episode. All of their jokes in this episode just fall flat, whether it's Clyde getting annoyed at Lincoln for not reading that British book, or their idea for getting the candy back from the bullies with the different ideas that they had, or the part where the bullies turned them into human pretzels, which just felt like a painful callback to get the message and was not as funny as the writers thought it was. My point is that whenever the episode goes back to focusing on Lincoln and Clyde, I end up tuning out since it's not that entertaining to watch, and I'm just waiting for the episode to return back to the part with the sisters. It's just a shame that the second half of the episode almost solely focuses on Lincoln and Clyde, and it gets really bland until the climax when all the sisters return. There's also these two bullies that show up, and man, I hated these bullies, probably even more than the ones in Legends. I hated these guys as the villains, who just come across as annoying and not scary in the slightest, which is a shame because every time you do a Halloween episode, you should actually have an antagonist who's creepy, so that it would actually fit the Halloween special. Also, I thought it was absolutely stupid how the whole neighborhood was literally ruined thanks to these two bullies. How the hell did this happen? You can't just say they were at supersonic speed and managed to trash every single house in Royal Woods. Did nobody seriously notice this? Did nobody call the police? This doesn't make any sense. And because of that, I also hate how the episode is expecting us to feel scorn for Lincoln and Clyde because all the sisters are sad that all their candy was stolen. This wasn't their fault. They had no intention of doing this. You can't make us feel scorn for these two when they didn't even intentionally do it. And while I appreciated the message at the end of the episode about how it's about giving rather than receiving, it feels completely tacked on and it doesn't fit with the episode. It's the same issue with the moral in No Guts, No Glory about how Laurie learns that you can't always say no, even though this is something that Laurie doesn't even learn in the episode. It just feels forced in rather than something Laurie has to learn for herself. It's the same thing with this episode. It doesn't feel like the characters are actually learning something. It just feels forced in instead of having the characters actually learn this for themselves. I know that's probably not a lot of people wanted to hear me say, but what did you want me to say? Say the episode is good even if I didn't like it? That's not what a critic's supposed to do. If I don't like something, I'll say I don't like it. But in the end, I guess I can't say Tricked is a bad episode, it's just really disappointing. So I'm gonna put this episode in the average house, but on the very low end of average. It's a shame too, because Tricked had the potential for something truly unique and entertaining, but instead it just plays itself safe and offers us a really bland Clink and McCloud episode that we've had far too many of this season. Seriously, I don't understand why so many people like this episode. It just plays it too safe, and personally, I don't think this is good enough to make a scary Halloween episode. The next time I want to see something scary, I'll just watch it from The Simpsons, Gravity Falls, or Regular Show, because at least they actually take chances, unlike this episode. Episode 51A, The Crying Dame. The children give Lily an old singing toy from the attic to help her stop crying, but it quickly drives them crazy. My favorite part about this episode would probably have to be the ending. I thought it was nice how all the siblings were trying to cheer Lily up by having Luna singing the song and Lincoln dressing up as the fox. I thought it was cute, and it was all topped off with a pretty funny ending when the parents come home and realizing, oh my god, our children are singing this song. They all run off, and then it just shows the son looking like the fox. I don't know if this is supposed to play out like a horror movie, but it was kind of disturbing and also kind of funny at the same time. Unfortunately, for most of the episode, I was just kind of annoyed. The thing that annoyed me the most about this episode would probably have to be the song itself. It constantly plays throughout the episode, and the song itself just isn't really funny. It's kind of annoying. I get it, it's a children's song, it's supposed to be played for babies, but still, that doesn't mean it has to be annoying to the audience as well. It also doesn't help that the beginning of the episode literally starts off with Lily crying, and she cries for about 2 minutes for the episode. And the rest of the episode's just kind of boring to me. There weren't really too many jokes I thought were funny, although I will admit the portrayal of Lynn Sr. and Rita in this episode were kind of funny, but aside from that, there wasn't really anything else I thought were super hilarious. It's probably a perfect middle-of-the-road episode, kind of like Snowboard, so this is just going to go into the average house. There's not really a whole lot more for me to say about this one. Episode 51B, Antisocial. The kids try to convince their dad the wonders of modern technology after he declares war on their electronic devices. You know what? For the times that we live in, I'm honestly glad that we finally get an episode that explores the problems of using too much technology. Yes, I understand that technology can also work well for for a lot of people, but it also causes some downsides as well. This episode has a similar execution to Fed Up, where the segment doesn't really take either side and the conflict that it presents. This episode only explores that simple problem: is technology gonna make your life easier, or is it just a distraction that cuts into time that can be spent with family? I also really liked the characterization in this episode. This episode doesn't really take sides on the technology debate, it actually cleverly turns the tables on the characters. The episode starts off with the kids addicted to their devices and Lynn Sr. as the one who only sees them as a distraction, and then eventually their roles are reversed. The kids successfully convince their father that using technology is great, but Lynn Sr. ends up the addicted one and the kids only see it as a distraction. There's even one scene where Lynn Sr. threatens to cut out the internet, and that's exactly what the siblings do towards the end of the episode. Some people may argue that the execution does seem very similar to Fed Up, but I actually like this episode a lot more, because it does a different twist with the characters and actually puts both of them in separate situations, even doing a role reversal. This episode is very relatable since I'm a person who always has to use technology to edit his videos while also trying to make sure that's not too much of a distraction so I can spend time with my family. No character is annoying in this episode, they're all worked pretty well into the story and some are even pretty funny. This episode does a good job showing how the crew writes their characters and trying not to make either side look worse than the other, especially if it's a reasonable debate. So yeah, I really liked this episode and I am gonna put it in the glory house. I still personally think Job Insecurity is the better episode of the two, but this one's still pretty amazing, and it's certainly one of Lynn Sr.'s best episodes. Episode 52A, Snow Way Down. When Lincoln goes on a vacation with Clyde, he realizes just how overprotective Clyde's dads are. So despite this being yet another Clink and McCloud episode, which we've had far too many of this season, I was still really excited to see this episode, and that was primarily because of Clyde's dads. I've always said before that these guys are usually the best part of any episode that they're in, whether it was in Attention Deficit or in episodes like Argue for Real. And they still managed to be the best part about this episode. Sure, some people have argued that their overprotective nature does get a little bit annoying, but I can totally understand where they're coming from. In fact, some of the things they try to stop Lincoln and Clyde from doing are pretty funny, like they don't want them to go and play snowball fights because they're worried that they're gonna have an ice ball to the head and it could cause some brain injuries and they'll end up in the hospital. Stuff like that makes this episode really funny. I also liked Clyde in this episode. You can tell that he's clearly trying to show his dads that he's not a baby anymore and that he's growing up and that he can take risks if he feels like it. Like I said, I do think it's really good when characters act out of their usual behavior because it shows that they're human and that they're developing, and I think that's great for cartoons like The Loud House. In terms of negatives, I didn't really have too many. I mean, sure, some of the jokes fell flat and the story was a little bit predictable. Also, I don't find the episode to be particularly very memorable. I mean, sure, it's funny, and it certainly has some good character development, but do I really remember anything special about it? Not exactly. When I had to rewatch it, I actually couldn't really remember most of the moments that actually happened. But those are only a few negatives that I had. For the most part, I really enjoyed this episode. I liked the character development, and of course, I loved seeing Clyde's dads being their usual selves. I'm gonna put this episode in the glory house. I know I didn't say too much about it, but honestly, I couldn't really think of what else to say about it. It's just a decent episode. And finally, episode 52B, Snow Way Out. Lana takes her siblings to Bourbon Burger to meet her race car hero despite the heavy snowfall. Before I say anything, I just want to ask, why did Snow Way Down and Snow Way Out have similar titles? At first I thought these were going to be two-parter episodes, but nope, they're just completely separate episodes that have similar titles. I'm kind of confused by that. Also, in some occasions, this episode would actually air before Snow Way Down, and I originally thought Snow Way Down was the season finale, but nope, it turns out to be this episode. I suppose first I should point out the positives. First, I liked Lana in this episode. I thought it was cute how she wanted to meet her race car hero, and her attempts of trying to actually get the ticket seemed cute, and I also liked the ending where she tries to help her siblings get out and risking her own ticket just so she can help her siblings survive. This wasn't the best that Lana has been all season, but I think for this episode she works really well. I also liked Flip. I thought he was an amusing character in this episode. He had a few funny moments, and he worked really well as a sort of semi-antagonist. And once again, it is a snow episode, and it does look nice, but it just kind of takes place at one location. That's really about it. Unfortunately, I have a lot of negatives with this episode as well. First off, did all the siblings really need to be in this episode? They all didn't really serve much of a purpose. If it had just been Lincoln and Lana going to Bourbon Burger, maybe I wouldn't have minded it so much, and maybe it would have given us some development with their relationship. But instead, nope, all the siblings are here. I understand it's a season finale, but that's not a reason to shoehorn all the siblings for this episode, especially if they barely do anything to serve the story. Also, we have Lenny being stupid once again with that whole closet snow thing and how she tries to warm the goulash with her hairdryer. But I think what I really don't like the most about this episode is that it's trying to be serious and it's trying to be funny at the same time. There's this one scene where all the siblings are freezing inside the Burpin Burger, and then during that sequence they try to throw in some comedic dialogue. You can't put drama and comedy together in one scene. It doesn't make any sense, and it just doesn't help the episode at all. Like I've said earlier, I don't like it when dramatic moments are being cut off by comedic dialogue. You have to pick one and be it. You can't do both. I understand it's a comedy, but you can't just get away with comedy during a dramatic moment. This episode felt boring to me. The plot was predictable, and it just wasn't that interesting. Nothing felt unique about this episode. I feel like this kind of tone is done a lot better with Homespun, where yes, dramatic moments do have some comedic dialogue, but at least in there it felt more natural and it was actually really heartwarming, and plus the dialogue itself was actually funny. Honestly, I'm just gonna put this episode in the average house. I wish it was a lot better because this is the season finale of season 2, but as is, it's just boring and predictable. That's kind of a mediocre way for the season to end. And on that note, we've now tackled all 49 episodes of The Loud House Season 2. Now before I get to the seasonal rankings and pie charts and all that jazz, I want to give out a few notes that I've had for Season 2. Some of you may complain that I didn't have any for Season 1, but I made these to mostly distinguish the differences between this season and the previous season. First off, Lori and Lisa have a lot of spotlight this season. Throughout most of the episodes this season, they seem to have quite a number of screen time. In Lori's case, she had quite a lot of episodes focusing on her. I think there was about 3 or 4 episodes where she was the main focus? I'm not sure, I couldn't really count. And most of the comedy came from Lisa, and she also had 2 episodes focusing on her. At least one of them portrayed her greatly, while the other one not so much. Lola's also improved a lot this season. Sure, she was improving a little bit towards the end of season 1, but this season pretty much turned her into one of my absolute favorite characters on the show. Lynn Sr.'s also got a lot of episodes focusing on him, which I think is nice because now that the parents' faces have actually been revealed, it gives them time to actually develop the parents' character. And Lynn Sr. certainly had a lot of development this season, and I think it works great because I like Lynn Sr. as a character. Sure, I didn't think of him too much in season 1, but now I'm really starting to like him a lot in season 2. There's been a lot of Clink and McCloud episodes this season. I counted, there were 11 episodes focusing on these two, and if you want to count the subplot and patching things up, that's technically 12 episodes. Now, I wouldn't have considered this a problem if all the episodes focusing on these two were actually interesting and developed their friendship a little bit, but no, most of the episodes this season are just them doing stupid things and trying to do comedy, and most of the time it just didn't work. There were only 3 good Clink and McCloud episodes this season. Other ones were just mediocre or just downright bad. I liked those particular episodes because in one way it's developing their friendship, but in another way it's also developing their character, like Argue for Real or Snow Way Down, which developed Clyde's character a lot more. In the past, I've previously been called a hater of Clink and McCloud. I never said I hated the pairing, I just wish there were more episodes that were actually interesting. Most of the episodes that focus on these two were just not really that interesting and really unfunny. I kinda hope the next season tones down on these episodes a lot. Lenny has also been incredibly flanderized this season. Now, I've had a lot of people complaining to me about this, saying that this has always been Lenny's character, like she's stupid and she's always meant to be stupid. Well, I personally have to disagree with those arguments because there's a distinct difference between someone being stupid and someone being ditzy. If someone's being stupid, they just constantly make stupid decisions and are constantly mistaking certain things for others. With Lenny, she's very ditzy, which means she's not entirely aware of a situation. She may say a stupid joke every once in a while, but that's only because she's not entirely aware of a situation and is just going along with it because she's not exactly sure what's going on. And I know this too because of my autism. I can be a little bit ditzy sometimes. I'm not saying Lenny has autism, I'm just saying she feels stupider than she did in season 1, which as a result has bumped down her character for me in terms of worst to best characters of the show. There were so many moments this season where Lenny kinda got on my nerves, whether it was her falling in love with the mannequin and Lock and Loud, or how she thought a drawing with Lincoln on it was actually Lincoln and kicked the bucket list, or that scene in Garage GarageBand where she thought the nightmare was real and she tries to keep herself locked in her room with Lana. There were just so many moments where Lenny wasn't really being ditzy but more of an absolute idiot. I don't want the writers to turn her into a clone of Patrick. I want her to stay the same character that she's been. Not to mention that Lenny's love for fashion wasn't seen a whole lot throughout this season. There was only one episode where it was mostly showcased, and that was in No Spoilers. And these reasons just kinda bumped down her character for me, which is a real shame because I used to love Lenny, but thanks to her flanderization, I've kind of grown to dislike her a little bit more. And lastly, Luna feels really left out this season. There are so many episodes where she usually gets like only 2 lines and then that's it. She just stays in the background and doesn't do anything unique. She doesn't play music for her siblings, she doesn't make any references, she just stands there and says absolutely nothing. And it doesn't help because there were no episodes focusing on Luna this season. Yes, there was L is for Love and Yes Ma'am, which featured her as a major character, but they didn't focus on her. There were more sibling episodes. And yes, those episodes were great and it did give Luna some spotlight, but it wasn't enough. The closest that we got to development from Luna is when she revealed that she was bisexual, but that's really about it. For the most part, she's just been resorted to a background character, or sometimes she can really get on my nerves, like in GarageBand. Season 3 has started off with her developing a little bit more, so I'm hoping that Season 3 gives her more spotlight unlike this season. I only hope the writers can catch on to these and try to improve themselves for the next season. Yes, there were things I liked about this season, but for the most part, it just kind of felt shallow. Season 1 was kind of special because it had a lot of episodes where the characters would develop, especially when it comes to Lincoln and his relationship with his sisters, but in this season, we didn't really get a whole lot of that. Instead, it kind of focused more on other characters, whether it was the parents or side characters. There wasn't even a whole lot of episodes focusing on Lincoln with his sisters. It was just mostly them trying to deal with the situation, or something to do with their parents, or, I don't know, another Clink and McCloud episode. I'm just kind of bothered by this because this show gave me the impression that this was all it was gonna be. This isn't really a big problem, it's just kind of stuck in my head at the very back throughout this season. Alright, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the statistics. Season 2 had 31 episodes in the Glory House, 11 episodes in the Average House, and only 7 episodes in the Garbage House. If you compare this chart to Season 1, you'll know that there's a lot more good episodes, a little less average episodes, and a lot less bad episodes. That's a pretty big improvement. So what's my overall ranking for Season 2? Well, if it wasn't obvious by the chart, I think Season 2 is a glory season. And I'm very happy about that because some people were upset that I gave Season 1 a ranking of average. Believe me guys, I really wanted to give Season 1 an average of Glory Season, but unfortunately, all the episodes were just very close with each other. Yes, there were more good episodes than most of them, but the average and bad episodes were very close with each other. But there's several other reasons why Season 2 is still better than Season 1. Not just from the fact that there's more good episodes and a lot more good episodes than any others, but the bad episodes this season, while there were a few of them, are certainly not as bad as most of the bad episodes in Season 1, especially the bottom 5. And most of the average episodes this season were actually pretty close to making it into the Glory House. They were just not that great and had to be shoved to the Average House instead. So yes, I'm glad that Season 2 is an improvement above Season 1. And even though there were a few notes this season that bothered me, overall I can safely say that Season 2 is a much better season than Season 1. Alright, now it's time to move on to my top 5 episodes for Season 2. There were certainly a lot of episodes to pick from this season, but after a few rewatchings of most of these episodes, I think I've got my finalized list down. Number 5, No Spoilers. This is easily Lenny's best episode by far. It portrays her in all the right elements that she's supposed to be. This episode gives each sibling their own chance to shine, and it was very sweet and very funny. Number 4, Fool's Paradise. This is certainly a huge improvement over April Fool's Rules. The comedy gags in this episode were actually a lot funnier, Luann plays more better than an antagonist than in April Fool's Rules, and the suspension was certainly high with this one. And at least the pranks were more creative, and at least we actually get to see Luann get her just desserts at the very end of the episode. Number 3, Friend or Fox, or Folks. I still don't know how to pronounce that. Anyway, this is certainly Lisa's best episode that does a great job focusing on the spectrum of autism. I loved the chemistry between Lisa and Darcy, and as I said, there was one scene that actually kind of got tears in my eyes. It's not often that a show actually does that. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to see more episodes focusing on these two in the future, if they actually decide to do it. Number 2, Job Insecurity. This episode just hits me in all the right spots. It's funny, it has character development, it's really sweet. It's just a great episode that I can't find any problems with. I thought it was really clever that they kept on foreshadowing this earlier in season 2, and the comedic gags in this episode, especially the ones with Mr. Grouse, were certainly a lot of fun to watch. And number 1, L is for Love. And before you ask, no, this episode isn't just number 1 because of the fact that Luna's bisexual. Everything else in this episode works its way up to the top. I love so many things about this episode. It's very sweet. It's good to see all the siblings helping each other trying to figure out who the love letter in question is for. I liked seeing the backstory of how the parents met and how that's inspiration for the siblings to do the exact same thing. I liked the comedy in this episode. There was not one joke where I wasn't laughing. And of course, it gives Luna some really great development and a good amount of screen time too, especially since she hasn't had a whole lot throughout this season. As I've said, I'm certainly excited to see if they're gonna do more episodes with Luna and Sam in season 3. And now it's time to move on to my bottom 5 for season 2. Picking the episodes for this list wasn't as hard as season 1, because with season 2 there were only 7 bad episodes. But even though there were certainly a lot more good episodes this season, it wasn't free of bad episodes as well. And here's the ones that I hated the most this season. Number 5, Making the Grade. This is easily Lisa's worst episode by far. It completely misses the point of her character. She's constantly falling under peer pressure throughout the episode. She only makes these kind of decisions just because Lincoln tells her to do it, and whenever people actually question her decisions and why she's suddenly acting normal, she constantly puts the blame on Lincoln. There wasn't anything funny about this episode, and I also forgot to bring up that whole color thing when whenever Lisa acts smart, it sprays her with water. Yeah, that scene wasn't funny either. Number 4, Change of Heart. This episode completely unmasked Lori as a character. I no longer see her as a sibling who's struggling with 10 siblings. I now see her as a monumentally selfish person who only cares about what makes her happy. She doesn't care about what other people are trying to do. She doesn't care if people are trying to get over her. She'll only get people back to normal just so she can get what she wants, and that really angers me. I honestly don't understand why so many people say that this is a good portrayal of Lori's character. It's not. It completely unmasked her character. Now I only see her as a selfish person, and it actually made her worse in my opinion. All throughout this episode, Clyde is trying to act normal around Lori, and she only wants him back just so she can occasionally say thank you from time to time. Number 3, Not Allowed. I'm glad that the writers confirmed that Lincoln wasn't adopted, but man, this episode was still stupid. The bird story itself wasn't that funny, it just came across as unrealistic, and the jokes were just cringeworthy. Need I bring up that abysmal field test gag that they bring up 4 times in the episode? No, it's best I don't bring it up, it'll just make me angry anyway. Number 2, No Such Luck. Yes, I know I said this isn't one of the worst episodes of all time, but I have to agree that it is a pretty miserable episode, and in terms of season 2, it certainly is a very bad episode. All of the characters are portrayed as massive idiots, and of course it made me hate Lynn even more as a character. But like I said, even though I really hate this episode, I don't think it's as bad as the bottom 5 episodes in season 1, except for one other episode, which I think is the absolute worst episode of all time, and that's my number 1, Brawl in the Family. If my rant wasn't enough, this is not only my least favorite episode of season 2, but it very well may be my least favorite episode of the entire show. This episode completely misses the establishments that it made with its characters, and they force us to believe that Lincoln is the one sibling that no one cares about, and that the sisters only view him as just a black sheep and nothing else. This is a very miserable episode where every single character is at their worst, and the comedy is the worst that the show has ever given us. There was not a single joke that I thought was funny. It is just incredibly heartbreaking how Lincoln is totally okay with thinking that he is a black sheep. I was just incredibly heartbroken when the siblings acted like Lincoln was the black sheep to the family, even though there were so many other episodes that showed that he was capable of fixing these types of issues. The story was absolutely stupid, it didn't make any sense, and the ending just left a very sour taste in my mouth. It would be impossible for them to make an episode worse than this one. I can't think of how they would do it. This episode is a disgrace to the Loud House and an absolute disgrace to television animation. And that's pretty much all I have to say for Season 2. Well, at least it was an improvement over Season 1, but here's hoping Season 3 will even be a million times better. Special thanks goes to the Loud House Wiki for providing the fun facts and premise for each episode. Another special thanks goes to Talking Loud for supporting me throughout making this video. It was certainly a stressful time, and of course, special thanks to all of you for watching this video and helping me get where I am right now. I'm really glad that I can continue making these videos for you guys, and I'm glad you all really enjoy them. And with all of that said, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time with The Loud House Season 3.